Yep.
Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, December 10th City Commission meeting. We will start with approving the agenda. The City Commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. Are there any additions, movements anybody would like to see?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Bully, second from Commissioner Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. We will move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled from the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Are there any items that the commission would like to remove from the consent agenda?
Nope.
I'd like to remove B7F.
Anything else?
I don't know if someone from the audience maybe was gonna, but B7D.
B7D? Okay. Any others? Are there any items a member of the public would like to remove from the consent agenda?
B7A.
B7A? Any others? Okay.
Move approval of the consent agenda with the exception of items B7A, B7B, and B7F. I believe that was it, Brad?
Was it D like dog or B like boy?
D like dog.
D.
So it's B7A, B7D, and B7F. Is that correct?
Yep.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Bully, second by Vice Mayor Finkeldye. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. So item B7A.
Excuse me, Porter. Sorry. I can't get the whole image in that. Thank you. Well, it's cutting off some of the image.
Oh, on top.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Oh, great.
Do you want to zoom it in like that?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
So now I can't go up again. There we go.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Ananda and Commissioners. My name is Michael Allman with Sustainability Action Network. I wanted to present you some background information and then a request on this item for pedestrian bicycle projects 2020 to 2024. Specifically, the Naismith Drive sidewalk on the east side. This is an issue that our organization has proposed a shared use path on the east side of that section. The part I'm talking about is part of this spoke here of the Lawrence Loop. The Lawrence Loop goes around. This is a major spoke, goes all the way up to KU. And right now, there is a gap between 19th and 23rd Street. What's on your agenda tonight is a proposal to put a sidewalk, a 6-foot wide sidewalk on the east side of Naismith between 19th and 23rd. That's where this half-mile gap is. In 2017, for the 2018 budget, our organization proposed that there be a shared use path built on that side for funded as a complete street as part of an overall project? Because right now, there is a capital improvements item for rebuilding Naismith Street in that section. And we proposed that it be built as a complete street with an SUP on the east side, bus turnout lanes, widen the travel lanes, new curb and gutter, new street lighting, things like that. So part of this is $296,700 for that SUP from bicycle pedestrian funds. The rest of it is stormwater funds, street maintenance funds for mill and overlay, things like that. This would replace what is existing goat path, very heavily used area of Lawrence from KU. And so far, the engineering staff, in talking about the sidewalk, mentioned nothing about the SUP at the Transportation Commission meeting in 2018, but they voted against the sidewalk because we brought it up. They also didn't mention it this last month when the Transportation Commission was considering this plan tonight. They didn't mention it in tonight's staff report on this item for you. We're requesting that, or this is the support already that we have, and we're
Thank you,
requesting
Michael.
you concur with the Transportation Commission on their vote against the sidewalk in 2018, because they didn't know that a month ago. They weren't informed by staff.
Thank you,
So
Michael.
that's what we wanted to bring up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I have some questions for staff, so I don't know. Oh, yeah, on this?
Do public comment first, or do we want to ask questions up here and then?
Well, I guess typically if we open up, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget to open it up in case there was.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do our questions and then
Yeah.
open it for public comment. Okay.
Anybody from staff?
Good evening, Mayor Commission. Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer with Municipal Services and Operations. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, so on the Naismith Trail one, I know I had understood that it was going to be a shared use path at one time. What changed that no longer is the case?
Well, I know it's always been staff's intention to determine what that bicycle facility is going to be when that project goes to reconstruction. And as was mentioned, it's currently an unfunded project in our CIP in the year 2024. So staff hasn't made the final determination on what that facility would be until we get to the design of that project. A shared use path is definitely one of the options that will be on the table when that comes through.
So you're wanting to build the sidewalk first and then at some point rebuild it to a multi-use path?
Potentially. Essentially, we don't know when that reconstruction project is going to happen. We know that in the 2013 Fixed Route Transit and Pedestrian Accessibility Study, this is one of the 4 corridors that the city looked at. 3 of them have been improved. This one has not yet been addressed. In addition, or I guess as a caveat, staff will be bringing before the commission next week approval for the mayor to sign an application to KDOT for a transit mobility enhancement grant for this sidewalk project, which would cover 80 to 90% of the project costs. If awarded, it's going to be staff's intention to explore the possibility of making that sidewalk a shared use path as part of that grant.
But you're wanting us to vote tonight just to do a sidewalk with no...
That is part of the 5-year
Possibility,
plan,
yeah.
yes, currently is listed.
Okay. I had a question on a couple other items. The intersection improvements at 19th and Osdale for $75,000.
Yes.
Why was that not done during the reconstruction of 19th Street?
In short, essentially, it's a timing issue. The 19th and Iowa Tunnel and street reconstruction project began in late 2018, and the genesis of improvements at 19th and Osdale for bicycle facilities didn't surface until May of 2019. So it just really wasn't feasible to move that work into this project. As you know, the 21st Street Bicycle Boulevards is yet to be constructed, and this was to be a part of that corridor.
Okay. Seemed like a lost opportunity there to maybe save some money.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, that's too bad. So the 13th Street Bike Boulevard for $200,000. I had thought that we were going to wait on the 13th Street Boulevard until the 21st Street one was put in and we saw how that worked.
I understand that there was definitely going to be a lag in those projects. I can't specifically recall what the decision was made in the discussion between Amanda and the commission as the timing of those projects.
It seems like it'd be important for us to know what that is, or staff to know what that is, what that discussion was, because I really thought we were going to hold off on that. Does anybody remember? Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's always been staff's idea that this plan that we're putting forward is flexible and adaptable, especially when it comes to grants and bicycle boulevards, and adapting to the situations that come up from that. So I guess if there's any reservation, staff is really looking for an approval of our 2020 projects. And so I guess if it's possible, we could get an approval of those projects and then come back to you next year with a revised 21 to 25 CIP for the bike ped funds.
So would that mean removing that Bike Boulevard 13th Street off of the 2020
I guess that would be up to the commission.
until we make a decision as to how the 21st
Right.
Street one works out? Is anybody interested in that at all, or you want to move forward with the 2020?
I don't know necessarily about 2020, but I wonder if removing it from the 20 to 24 plan would then move other projects into that space and remove any kind of planning around maintaining funding for that.
Yeah, I imagine that would. But I'm concerned if we vote on it for tonight, then essentially it's a go ahead to do it. It's a signal that we're going to go ahead and do it. You say it's flexible, which I appreciate that. However, what I've seen in the past is that once we approve a budget, a lot of times they'll just move forward with it. Maybe. I'm just concerned that we're going to build it before we really know how the 21st Street Boulevard bike works, Bike Boulevard.
I vaguely remember that conversation, and it was kind of either 13th or 21st, or both, and I don't remember how it ended. Of course, I was drinking through a fire hose really strong at that point, but I would rather that if we need a little extra time to address these issues or concerns or questions, and even to review the record of what we had done, I'd rather delay a week and get it right and bring it back to you. So if there are other concerns that are brought up before anybody else, we'll have a little time to digest and then hopefully get it approved. We do have some urgency in getting the projects going.
Yeah, I understand
This is
that.
the time to do those, but I certainly don't want to rush something if you have these kinds of concerns.
I got it. I just say one of my concerns is the concept of the shared use path. I would like separate facilities for pedestrians and for bikes and scooters. I mean, I think with the e-scooters that we're coming along with, you're getting some pretty good speeds on those things, and mixing pedestrians with the speeds that you're getting with the scooters is going to be a problem in the future. So I'm really losing interest in shared use paths. I'd like to have separate facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists. So, I mean, with regard to the sidewalk, I think the sidewalk is probably a good idea, but I'm a little leery of going ahead with that when we don't know what facilities we're going to have for the bicycles on that very critical link between the Naismith Trail and KU. So I'd really like staff to be looking at, separating the pedestrians from the other from wheeled vehicles like bikes and e-bikes. So that's one of my concerns.
Are there any other questions for staff?
I do have a question. The 9th Street project, I know it's not until 2024, the 9th Street project from Hilltop to east of Avalon, that's where I live. I live right next to that. And I know it stops where that old rock house is because you can't take out that rock wall on the historic property.
Okay.
It seems like it seems like a lot of money to spend on a very short length of sidewalk that will end, and you'll have to cross the street anyway. I don't know what staff has looked at that, but I'd be interested in analyzing that. There was a really steep slope, there's a retaining wall, and it dead ends in 2 spots. So I'm not sure it's a great use of money. I'd like at least staff to look at that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, and the projects that ended up on our 5-year plan were a result of the revised non-motorized projects prioritization policy that was approved by the Transportation Commission, Multimodal Transportation Commission earlier this year. And it was those guidelines that are that policy that produced the scores that helped build this 5-year plan, which was approved by the Multimodal Transportation Commission at their last November meeting.
Other questions? Okay, we will open it for public comment. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Katie Walsh. Congratulations to the winners. Muchas gracias, Mayor Larson. Congratulations, Mayor Ananda. I could shed some light on that 13th Street question. It was voted by the last commission to build 21st Street and then wait and see how it went, if it really did slow traffic down, if it worked, then 13th Street. So the neighborhood, East Lawrence, was relieved, thinking it would be 2021, 22, but certainly not next year. The other thing I wanted to bring up in this particular issue, the money transferred for the neighborhood traffic management plan, that all sounds great. They want to cooperate with KU students as part of it, but I just wanted to remind the planning staff that we have 2 universities in town, and if you're going to work with KU, you should also work with Haskell. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I can elaborate on 13th Street after speaking with Amanda. It was her intent that when we bid 21st Street to bid 13th Street as an alternate and then bring that back to commission. Am I saying that correctly, Amanda?
Amanda Saheen, Engineering Program Manager. We had the plans ready. We were going to bid it, so it's an option next year. We would not award that by any means without this commission's approval. So we wanted to see what the cost was. If there was significant cost savings and interest in doing it next year, we wanted to have that option available. But if it is not something, once we get bids in, because those plans, we'd already paid for the plans, so they're basically sitting on the shelf. If it wasn't something we were interested in proceeding with, that wouldn't be something that we would go ahead and do without a commission approval. We just wanted to, it also will be a nice verification of what our budget is on that project to have bid it as an option. But if we see some really great economy of scale, we just wanted to leave that as an alternative. But I think there's plenty of other projects that could move up if that project didn't, if we chose not to go that route. And we should be seeing you likely in January or February with those bid numbers. So we'll know pretty early in the year what those bids come in like.
So by voting on it tonight, we're not voting to actually do the project? We're not going to vote on that until January or February?
Well, you would have to award, you guys would have to approve the award of the bid. So if we chose at that point not to award that alternate, and then those funds would be available for another project. And we could probably come back with, I would assume we would just move something up 1 year that we were looking at for the next year. So we just wanted to leave it as an option since we do have the plans available. They are fully designed. Thought it would be a good opportunity to see what kind of prices we get. But we have no commitment to build it next year if this commission chooses not to.
I would be interested in hearing, having somebody take a look at that tape where we did the vote, because I really thought we were going to completely hold off on this.
So do you want to defer for a week?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I agree we should defer. I mean, I would say a couple things real quick. I mean, I wasn't here when the vote was taken, but I certainly think it makes sense to see how 21st goes before we invest the money on 13th. It's a new concept for us, and I think it's worth seeing how it's done. I do definitely support Commissioner Bully, I hear what you're saying about separating, but at the very least, we need a shared use path along Naismith. At the very least, it's an important part of the hub, especially with the new apartment complex going in, the new path under the new tunnel under Iowa coming down 19th Street. It becomes a critical area, and we need good transportation there. And then finally, I just add as a comment, I really want staff to look at that 9th Street from Avalon down. I said my house backs up to the house with the rock wall, and we installed the crosswalk there because you couldn't get a sidewalk through that rock wall. And to go from the rock wall down a really steep hill to get to the apartment complex for $460,000 does not seem like a good use of funds. We could do some other projects with that. Now, maybe I'm wrong, I'm just one person, but I think it should be looked at. Whenever you have a sidewalk that dead ends, I always worry about paying for it. If it's not going from an intersection to an intersection, I'd want that looked at.
I do think the idea behind that is to have sidewalks on both sides of our arterials, I believe. However, I agree with you, because I live right there too, as you know, and it's a very, going up that hill is just insane, and you got about that much. It doesn't seem like you have a lot of space to put a sidewalk in without tearing out the whole hillside.
Yeah.
So it does seem pretty expensive, but I realize that's not till 2024, so.
I think looking at the shared use path is pretty important for the spokes of that wheel. And
Yeah.
if we operate under the presumption that it will be a sidewalk, then it will likely be a sidewalk.
That's what I'm-
And
yeah.
so how do we kind of, if it's flexible, then we can operate from the shared use path and be flexible down if we need to. But I would rather not work under the assumption that we would put ourselves in a position to flex up. It's harder to do.
True. So what do we want to do? Do we want to propose removing that, or?
Do
we
you want to
wanna-
just defer for a week?
Defer
Do we
for
want to
a week.
defer?
Yeah, just for, I'm sorry.
Move to defer for a week.
I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Bully, second by Commissioner Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously.
Mayor, if I may, if there's anything else that the commission sees that catches your attention, please let me know, and we'll try and be prepared to have those discussions in the presentation next week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to B7D. And Courtney?
Yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time on this because obviously we have a lot happening here. But I do hear, and I did discuss with you earlier, so it won't be a big surprise, from people concerns that AHAB is a different makeup than the former board CDAC used to have. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on that, and then we'll be able to move on from that.
Sure. Danny Walters with the Planning Department, Community Development Division. Historically speaking, and this was before my time, so this is what I have from kind of our files. The CDBG money was divided into target neighborhoods, basically, for the public service money. So because of that, the target neighborhoods were represented on at that time, I believe it was the Neighborhood Resources Advisory Committee. Fast forward several years, right before I got here, they had stopped kind of referring to the low mod areas as target neighborhoods, and they changed that board to be the Community Development Advisory Committee, but they just kind of left the makeup the way it was with the low mod and the at-large representation on there. The AHAB, really all they're doing is looking at those home applications and providing a recommendation that will ultimately come back to this body for approval. The public participation in it really is tied into the citizen participation plan. I think before we were holding our public hearing with the Community Development Advisory Committee, the public hearing going forward will be held with this body. So there will be a lot of opportunity for folks of all income brackets to talk about the recommendations. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anything else? Okay, we'll take public comment on this item. Okay, so we'll bring it back up to the commission. Do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, make a motion to accept. Oh no, I've never done this before. Okay. To adopt the Community Development Block Grant Home Investment Partnership Citizen Participation Plan document and accept the CDBG Home Grant Recommendation Process document.
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Shipley and a second from Commissioner Bully. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. B7F.
Thank you, Mayor. I just pulled this off the agenda, obviously not necessarily to hold it up, except, at some point, I'd like to have a discussion about, the idea of the 3 meetings a month and looking at maybe 4 meetings, the idea of the work session and the way those work together. Not saying that's a discussion we need to have tonight, but as we're voting on the calendar, I just wanted to say at some point, I'd like to have that discussion, and at some point next year, at some point.
Okay. Anything else?
This may not particularly go here, but I know you guys always kind of agree on which things you're going to, usually during the calendar discussion at the end of the meeting. It seems like a lot of commissioners like to go to the land meetings now, and I didn't know how we get that added to the list so that I don't have to arm wrestle Commissioner Boley or Commissioner Larson for the opportunity to go to those meetings. So I didn't know how that got added to the list of things to.
I think we can
Decide.
just add that to the calendar on a monthly basis.
Okay.
At the end of the meeting,
All right. Anything else? Public comment on this item? Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission.
I move to adopt the 2020 City Commission meeting calendar.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Larson, a second from Vice Mayor Finkeldye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, I think that is all the consent agenda. So now we will move on to public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any item or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and location in Lawrence. Speakers should address all comments or questions to the commission. Public comment?
My name is Ron Wilson. I'm fighting for my life in a passive mode right now. I will not make any threats. If anyone, including this commission membership or persons of the DA office, was an Afro-American or Mideast heritage, and I threatened them with a hanging, or if I made sexual advances to your 12-year-old son, there would be an immediate and intensive investigation. There is a saying that actions speak louder than words. Are you ignoring a hateful sexual threat made by a police person against me and just gave weak comments about being looked into, the investigation being looked into? A hate crime is a hate crime. Do you respect and follow the law? Do you respect these citizens around here? You have known about this since July, and I've repeatedly appeared here asking questions, and I think you know about how many times I have been here. I'm now demanding that something be done to investigate the threat towards me. For the DA's office to find out if there's a police cover-up, why the police are doing nothing about it, and for not doing the initial investigation requested back in July. Not giving its citizens the same protection under the law that all of you expect. Simply put, I'm fed up with what I believe to be an irresponsible attitude and stalling tactics. Yes, I am not a happy camper because the actions and beliefs of the White House politicians are now infecting Lawrence. I'm becoming more and more ashamed to live in Kansas. I do not hate the 2 people that killed me, nor the nation's enemies that I swore to fight against when I was in the military for 20 years, or anybody else that refuses to have a healthy respect for the law, that have no sound human moral or ethic standards. As a 20-plus year veteran, I still follow that oath that I gave many years ago of be willing to die to protect you. I have my standards that I live with. What are yours?
One moment, full presentation up. Go ahead.
And to make sure people can hear you, I'm going to do this. That's your presentation. Do this, and then you can just advance.
Cool. Thanks. My name is Alex Rodriguez. I live 2333 Ridge Court. We have a presentation for you today on behalf of the Lawrence Solidarity Pit Crew. Here we'll talk about the problem of homelessness in the city of Lawrence, debunk myths about homelessness, share our realities through storytelling, and show that we stand together as a community to work to definitively combat homelessness. People who experience homelessness have an average life expectancy of around 50 years of age, almost 20 years less than the normal housed individual. And hypothermia is a leading cause of injury and death among people experiencing homelessness. Last year, cold waves and winter storms set new records across the country. Last month, the cold wave shattered 400 more records across the country for November. Right now, hundreds of our Lawrence neighbors are left on the streets to face the bitter cold and looming threats of snowstorms. Research has shown that housing people can reduce the number of homeless at a lower cost to society than leaving them without homes. Right now, the city of Lawrence does not have a plan to eradicate homelessness. Right now, the city of Lawrence actively criminalizes homelessness. Through city policies and ordinances such as 14417 and 14418, which criminalize the methods homeless people use to make a living and survive on the streets, this city condemns its most vulnerable citizens to poverty and death.
I'm Hamza, I live on 24th Street. There's a lot of stigma about homelessness. It's a myth that homeless people are lazy and don't want to work. The fact is that rising homelessness is due to a growing shortage of affordable housing and increased poverty. Massive wealth inequality means that even if people can find work, this does not automatically provide an escape from poverty. In 2018, the richest 10% in the U.S. held 70% of all total household wealth, while the poorest half of the population held only 1% of total household wealth. More people are struggling due to eroding job opportunities, wage stagnation, and funding cuts to public safety net programs. If you are poor, you were essentially an illness, an accident, or one paycheck away from living on the streets. Since 2000, the incomes of low-income households has declined as rents continue to rise. Nationally, someone would need to make $18.65 an hour to rent a modest one-bedroom apartment, or $22.96 an hour to cover a two-bedroom place. Service industries, which are projected to see the most job growth, don't even pay this much in salaries. This also means that someone earning the federal minimum wage would have to work more than 3 full-time jobs, 127 hours per week to afford a two-bedroom rental, and 103 hours for a one-bedroom, according to a report from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. These numbers don't even include the cost of utilities and other necessary expenses. Myth: the homeless are older and single, and most of them are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Fact: although houseless populations are at a greater risk of substance abuse, this does not describe most of the houseless population. Families with children are among the fastest growing segments of the homeless population. Battered women who live in poverty are often forced to choose between abusive relationships and homelessness. Nationally, approximately half of all women and children experiencing homelessness are fleeing domestic violence. I'd also like to add that that substance-related addictive disorders are treatable and that millions of Americans are affected by this every year. Medical and psychiatry journals indicate that substance use disorders are strongly linked to childhood traumatic experiences and post-traumatic stress disorder, and so the stigma surrounding them is cruel and unjustified.
Hi, my name is Yoshi. I live on 10th Street. Myth: homelessness is long-term. Fact: in most cases, homelessness is a temporary circumstance and not a permanent condition. Most studies are limited to counting people who are in shelters or on the streets, resulting in underestimates of homelessness. In reality, many also live in vehicles, makeshift housing, or are doubled up with friends and relatives. Myth: fighting homelessness is expensive. In fact, studies show that simply housing people can reduce the number of homeless at a lower cost to society than leaving them without homes. For example, the Central Florida Commission on Homelessness found housing costs $10,000 per person a year, while leaving them homeless costs law enforcement and jails and hospitals and other community services up to $31,000 per person a year. Furthermore, many cities have successfully built tiny home villages run and managed by the homeless themselves. We need change. We have only one emergency homeless shelter in all of Douglas County. Yet our homeless count showed a 35% increase in just the past year, according to the Lawrence Journal World. Our city doesn't have a plan to prevent or eradicate homelessness. Our city paid a consultant to assess our shelter and then failed to fully fund the consultant's recommendations to improve homeless services while awarding up to $19 million for the new police department building. Trying to kick our houseless folks to the edge of town away from city services is not a solution, and there wouldn't be enough space to stuff our entire houseless population in there even if you tried. Did you know that overcrowding increases the risk of transmittable diseases? Did you know that the lack of privacy is linked to depression and other negative psychological problems? This problem isn't going to go away on its own, and our community shouldn't just look away from this while people suffer. What we're doing is not enough. We need change, and we need to do more. Thank you.
Stuart Luckman, 1515 Eagle Road. Any functioning society must decide its political decisions based on ethical and just policy. If any governmental unit fails at this duty, the citizens of said government have good reason to protest, demand action, and ultimately oppose all actions of said government. The way that the city of Lawrence deals with its houseless population is a fundamental violation of human dignity, portraying its leaders as either inherently cruel or terminally unconcerned. The National Coalition for the Homeless argues in December of 2018 that the houseless suffer from poor living conditions, which make their life expectancies 20 years shorter than the average person. The composite effects of years of poor health care, malnutrition, and disease would take their toll on any person. It is an unimaginably cruel form of suffering which we are morally obligated to mitigate. Not only is our collective compassion lacking, many strike out with pure malice. 20 years of hate crimes against the houseless have been recorded, with 1,769 reported acts, 476 of which ultimately proving lethal. These despicably evil crimes must be stopped immediately, and the institutions with the most leverage to act are localities. A new city commission is in place, and it is now up to them to act or to be thrown into the ash heap of history. The city commission must be swift and effective in any possible policy proposal. This should take the form of targeting affordable housing to tackle one of the root causes of houselessness within the city. A 2018 BBC report found that 5,200 households were unduly burdened with their financial obligations. Furthermore, 700 households were at risk of becoming houseless. In situations like these, there can be no half measures. Lawrence must immediately funnel as much resources as possible into resolving this dilemma as agenda item number 1. It must be stressed that even when this is accomplished, your work is not over. Less than a month ago, 2 houseless people were murdered in Wichita. This problem is close to home, and Lawrence must pay attention to the people most directly harmed by its recent draconian policies on taxation and housing. Remove regressive fees such as the August utility fee proposals, find a more progressive method of funding the local economy, and place resources into the hands of the most marginalized. Only when Lawrence stops blinding itself to this crisis can the city be called an ethical and just society. Going forward, the wise words of Frederick Ingalls and the condition of the working class in England are especially poignant. When society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet too early in a natural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessaries of life, places them under conditions which they cannot live, its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of a single individual. Lawrence is committing social murder, and thousands of our fellow citizens could be next. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Peterson, and my address is 311 East 9th Street. Before I begin, I would just like to say trigger warning. The way Lawrence treats its homeless is disgusting, inhumane, and immoral. 2 years ago, I was pregnant and forced to live outside. A stranger targeted me on Mass Street and beat me until I miscarried. I was screaming for help while people watched. No one came to my rescue. They watched and did nothing because I was a known homeless person. My perpetrator was never convicted. Homeless humans are subjected to extreme violence. Violence from laws meant to criminalize homelessness, people who commit hate crimes, the police, and from the housed community. One night, I fell asleep at the corner of 9th and New Hampshire. I felt like someone was staring at me, so I woke up to find a cop standing with his legs spread over me. He did not try to wake me up. He sexually assaulted me. When I got away from him, he threatened to give me an illegal camping ticket. I have been spat on, beaten, raped, assaulted, and verbally abused for being homeless. We need change in the city. We need love, kindness, and empathy towards the homeless, not anger, hate, and greed. The hate crimes the homeless are subjected to need to end now. They need shelter, food, water, services, and counseling. They require your compassion, not your neglect. They need humanity. What happened to humanity?
Is there any other public comment?
My name is KP Pruitt, and I live at 2037 26th Street. I'm here tonight to also talk about homelessness. Just a clarification before I begin, when I use the term gender oppressed people as like a general term, I mean not only cisgender women, but also transgender women and men, as well as non-binary people. Gender oppressed houseless people face challenges that they often cannot find support for. Those who menstruate struggle to find necessary pads and tampons, and other sexual health items are expensive and hard to come by as well, such as various forms of birth control. Houseless trans people in particular also face unique problems. 1 out of 5 trans people have been discriminated against when attempting to find housing, and 1 out of 10 have been evicted based on gender identity alone. When houseless trans people try to utilize services such as homeless shelters, they are discriminated against in these spaces as well. They also face high rates of violence inflicted on them. Violence against gender-oppressed people who are houseless is a major problem. This violence can come from strangers, but it can also come from partners. Often women and trans people cannot escape this violence because they also rely on their partners for survival. The Willow Center can be a helpful service for survivors of abuse. However, it assumes that people are already a survivor of abuse. Currently, there are no resources to help prevent this violence in the first place. In fact, funding to the homeless shelter has been drastically cut. Cutting funding to the shelter puts more gender-oppressed people on the street. This increases their chance of facing abuse. To make matters worse, you all unanimously approved millions of dollars to renovate offices for the police. 40% of police families experience domestic violence at the hands of the police officer. You took money and safety away from women and trans people and gave it to those who are far more likely to perpetrate violence and abuse. The police are the enemies of the houseless population. Recently, the police cruelly demolished the campsites of many houseless people, destroying their possessions and setting them back in ways you cannot imagine. The commission insulted the houseless population further by falsely claiming you had refunded the shelter. I'm sure you all consider this an innocent mistake, but when 5 people get to decide who lives and dies in the city, there is no innocence. I want you to look at every houseless person here, and I want you to really think if you can live with the decision to take away resources from them and to give those resources to the police who regularly harm them. If you cannot live with this decision, it is your responsibility to take immediate action. If you can live with this decision, know that we can't, and we won't allow you to commit violence against the houseless population.
My name is Susan Lopez. I am houseless. You can find me behind Amtrak, the second entrance in, the third showing to your left. Okay. I've been houseless for 3 years since I moved here. Yes, because I couldn't stay at the shelter then because they had bed bugs. Well, you got rid of the bed bugs and then you kicked everybody out of the shelter. Because I couldn't get in after that. all right? I know I can tell you so many stories, but I'm gonna tell you mine. I got with a guy, and I lived with him, and he almost beat me to death. So the domestic violence happens indoors, because that's what happened. I can't feel this side of my face, so if you want to play with your phone like you've been doing, I mean, standing up there watching, that's fine. But I can't do this. This is going to be the coldest winter in 20 years. That's what I'm being told by the natives, and the natives I trust, because they are good people. And they have taught me so much. I have never been homeless before in my entire life, and I am 50. And I am freezing to death out there. And I've been out here for 3 years, so I'm a quick learner, and I learned how to set up a tent. I learned a lot of things real quick. But there's people out there that can't do it. They don't know how to do it. You have no clue how many tents I have to show people how to set up, because they don't even know how to set up a tent, if they even get a tent. You have no idea how bad it is out there. Because right, the shelter's closed, the shelter gives them this emergency pack and a tent and sends them on their way. No. I chose to stay out of the shelter because of the bed bugs. I said when they got rid of the bed bugs, I would go back, ask any of the monitors at the shelter. And they got rid of the bed bugs, and then they had no beds. And then, okay, they opened 25 beds up. By the time I found out who lives in the woods and has no means of information, they were already taken. I call every day. But no, there isn't. One day when I did call, there was one, but somebody got there before me. So I just figured the universe, they needed it more than me. This is not fair. I have a friend out there, a good friend. His mind broke when he served in the forces. Okay, he talks to himself and he hits the ground. And they take him to jail for illegal camping, tickets, or whatever, but they don't get him help. They don't get him any kind of help. I make sure he eats.
Thank you for your comments.
I don't care.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Faith. I live on Vermont Street. Like many communities all across the country, the city of Lawrence has a chronic homelessness problem caused by massive wealth inequality and lack of equal opportunity and proper resources for our houseless citizens. One of the many possible solutions to this issue is tiny home villages, which have been tried, tested, and proven effective in many cities, including Austin, Seattle, and Portland. Tiny homes are generally small structures between 70 to 200 square feet in size, designed to provide shelter for people living on the street, with insulation and electrical wiring, but often without bathroom or cooking facilities, which can be constructed in separate installations on the site. They are meant as a form of temporary sheltering until permanent stable housing can be found, effectively keeping people safe and protected from the elements while maintaining a degree of dignity that houseless people are often denied by their circumstances. Furthermore, tiny home villages are run, maintained, and operated by houseless people living in them, allowing them responsibility and a sense of pride in their homes, as well as democratic control over their living situation, something houseless people often do not have. The cost of each tiny home varies depending on the region, but the homes in the Seattle villages each cost approximately $2,300, including supplies and building materials. Maintenance and construction can easily be done by both housed and houseless volunteers, provided the local government cooperates in adjusting zoning provisions and codes to accommodate their construction. With the proper support from local city and non-governmental organizations, tiny home villages could easily be an efficient and sustainable means of helping out houseless citizens and possibly even saving lives. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Connor. I live on Creek Drive. I'm a member of the Lawrence community, and I've come here to speak tonight because of the treatment of the houseless is important to me. Houseless people are people, and they deserve the same rights as each and every other member of society. The way the city treats the houseless as an aesthetic problem to be swept under the rug instead of an incredibly disturbing crisis is unnerving to me. Houseless is too often treated as a problem because it is unfortunate to look at, be around, and think about for any length of time. This is a fundamental perversion and distortion of the horrible suffering houseless people endure. We cannot help our fellow citizens, our neighbors, our friends, by pushing them to the margins to be ignored. Whether we can see it or not, the houseless are suffering, and I will not stand for it. I call on the City Commission to end their abuses, cease the empty words, empty gestures, and lies told to those confronting you on your lack of action. Houseless people are not an inconvenience or a political talking point. They deserve so much more. They deserve shelter, they deserve food, they deserve clean water, they deserve compassion, they deserve empathy, they deserve safety, they deserve to live. They deserve your attention and your action. This is my community, and this is our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul. I live in Southwest Lawrence. I want to talk a little bit about the houseless shelter. I know that in August, the shelter was forced to close 60 beds. They were able to bring back 25 of the beds, but people are going to freeze. It's winter. The winters are only going to get colder year in and year out. And they're still down 35 beds from, in my opinion, they did not have enough beds to begin with in July, and then after August, the situation has gotten even worse. I don't want people to freeze to death in my city. I don't want people to die of preventable deaths in my city. I want people to be able to live the happiest lives they can, and I know that providing people shelter can give them, first of all, the opportunity to survive freezing cold winters, but also the opportunity to get back on their feet and hopefully make their situation better. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lacey Rowe. I live on Cynthia Street. Today is International Human Rights Day. The right to adequate housing was first recognized as part of the right to an adequate standard of living in the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The criminalization of homelessness in the U.S. has been condemned by the UN Special Rapporteur as discriminatory, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. While the right to adequate housing does not oblige governments to construct housing for all residents, it does require measures necessary to prevent homelessness, prohibit forced evictions, address discrimination, focus on vulnerable and marginalized groups, ensure security of tenure, and guarantee that everyone's housing is adequate. I am here today because I support the right to adequate housing. I support my houseless neighbors who are here today and the ones who couldn't make it to this meeting. Houseless people deserve more. This is my community and this is our community. And I think we need to do a better job of taking care of our community. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joel Gallegos. I live in West Lawrence, and I just wanted to say that I'm a member of this community and I appreciate all the efforts everyone here behind me is doing and giving you guys great ideas to pursue in terms of helping the homeless community around here. I know there's more that can be done, and I'd like to see something happen that could help eradicate homelessness here in Lawrence. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna Groth. I'm a resident here in Lawrence. I am a AmeriCorps alum, and I support the rights of my houseless neighbors. I believe this is, like Lacey said, my community, and this is our community. I served 3 terms in AmeriCorps. One of my terms, I served at Lawrence Community Shelter. All my terms, I served people here in Lawrence who are in poverty, helping them to get medical care and to get job placements. Helped with more than 100 job placements. I've just, through my 3 years of AmeriCorps and the 11 years I've lived here in Lawrence, I've met many people who've been houseless because of many different situations. I've known people who became houseless after fires. I've known people who were houseless while applying for disability. I've known people who were houseless fleeing violence. One of my friends who couldn't make it today wanted me to add that she would be houseless due to her disability if she didn't have the financial support of her family. I just believe all people, whether they're houseless or housed, have dignity and deserve to be treated with dignity. I know that we have a newly elected city commission, and I hope a strong priority is going to be to make sure that all houseless people are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve.
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. I decided to jump in because it looks like this is going to go on till midnight. The city has no intention of doing anything about homelessness. Last spring and early into the summer, I attended about 3 meetings of the Coalition on Homelessness that met in the library. And the chair of the meeting was one of the local landlords, a very prominent name in that community. Well, the other members were a kind of a loose aggregation. There was no there. So later on, I went to a meeting of the Commission on Affordable Housing, and it was chaired by somebody from the chamber. Wow. I'll bet the chamber really cares about homeless people. So it's just a complete mess. And you're not going to do anything about it because now we have a vice mayor who works probably for the oligarchy, and we don't have anybody kind of bringing the homeless situation to a center of gravity. We have all of these groups and this and that and whatnot, but there's nobody who seems to have a focus on it. And it is it's a problem. I don't like to be walking down Massachusetts Street and see the entire block lined with people soliciting money. I don't like that. And I have let people know that, maybe they ought to try to find another situation. But we don't have services for these people. We don't have, it would not take a pile of money to find these temporary housing for these people. And we need to get to the bunglers in the state legislature to fund mental health services, because those are badly needed.
Hi, my name's Margaret, and I live on West 6th Street. Just as a citizen of Lawrence, it is absolutely despicable that it calls itself progressive when it doesn't even care for its own houseless population. Considering the fact that, just from my own anecdotal experiences of walking around the city and interacting with those that are houseless, it's just very heartbreaking because there are like absolutely no services for people that are houseless. I mean, literally the community shelter is like closed by K10 and of course by the jail too, which is kind of ironic, city planning there. Just as somebody who like is able to afford like living in a place that has a roof over my head, you know, I just realized that like I could become houseless myself. It could be like I could lose my job, I could get sick, or my partner could get sick and we would have to move out on the street. So it can just happen to anybody. And for you to just, okay, this vote to build this multi-million-dollar police station and just leave these people out in the cold when we're expected to get the coldest winter in years. So as just somebody who is an ally, I don't know, I hope you think about this deeply and look into your own hearts and in your own humanity and try to actually do your job. So that's all I have to say.
Hi, my name is Zach and I live on 13th Street. I support the rights of my houseless neighbors. The LJ World put out a survey that said from 2018 to 2019, this was taken last January, from 2018 to 2019, there was a 35% increase in houselessness in Lawrence. Many folks, social media, all over the place, say that this is due to a population increase. This is simply false. Reports actually show that is the opposite is happening, that population in Lawrence is decreasing. And we can also see that social services in Lawrence are staying the same. The commission is comfortable with throwing millions of dollars at different state forces that cause violence, all while leaving hundreds of houseless folks out in the cold. And I believe that houseless people deserve more. This is my community, and this is our community, and I call upon the city commission to do more. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Thomas Peters. I live on West 27th Street. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, on any given night, there are at least 533,000 houseless individuals in this country. Yet Amnesty International USA reports that there are 5 times as many vacant homes as there are houseless people. Of course, that number is a low estimate and does not take into account those with unstable or temporary housing, or those of us who couch surf but have no place to truly call home. Furthermore, in December of 2017, Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, concluded that in many cities, homeless persons are effectively criminalized for the situation in which they find themselves. Sleeping rough, sitting in public places, panhandling, public urination in cities that provide almost zero public toilets, and a myriad of other offenses have been devised to attack the quote-unquote blight on homelessness. My own experiences and those of my houseless friends and comrades in this city verify that Lawrence itself is one of those cities that effectively criminalizes and brutally punishes our most vulnerable citizens, the houseless. As such, I call on the City Commission to strongly reconsider and repeal measures taken to actively harm and discourage the houseless members of our community, including the cutting of funding to the shelter and the imposition of City Ordinances 14417 regarding illegal camping, which makes it impossible for any houseless person to simply exist in our community and public spaces, as well as 14418, which has been repeatedly used as justification to harass and attack houseless people throughout the community, both by law enforcement and private citizens under the guise of fighting quote-unquote aggressive panhandling. Furthermore, we know that many of these measures taken to criminalize the houseless community were lobbied and advocated by Downtown Lawrence Incorporated and other corporate bodies, and I firmly believe that the needs of the people of this city should come before the profit-generating desires of the wealthy among us, whose only concern is furthering their own financial interests, and I sincerely hope that the officials and servants of the city, as officials and servants of the city, you agree. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? All right. My name is Z. I live on Vermont Street. At the end of August, the City Commission failed to fully fund the only homeless shelter in Lawrence, forcing it to cut its residency in half and putting at least 65 vulnerable people back on the street. To make matters worse, the shelter is located on the outside of town with only one city bus going there. This makes it nearly impossible to get there easily and safely. We know that due to pressure from corporate lobbying, the City Commission placed the shelter there intentionally, and several official measures were passed that criminalize houseless people and push them further out of the city. This, combined with a lack of resources to help houseless people gain and maintain stable housing, makes life hell for our most vulnerable citizens and prevent their ability to live comfortable lives. Lawrence prides itself on being a welcoming city no matter where you're from, unless, of course, you're poor or houseless. The City Commission can take concrete steps to make Lawrence a truly welcoming city. The complete repeal of City Ordinance 14-417, which criminalizes the only means of survival for several houseless people, what you would call camping on public property, and the repeal of 14-418, an ordinance that has been repeatedly used as a justification to attack and abuse houseless people as they try to make a living by flying signs or asking for donations from their neighbors. Both of these ordinances put a vulnerable population at an even greater risk for negative interactions, both with law enforcement and hostile private citizens. If these ordinances are not repealed, we will all know that the allegiances of the city and its government lie with guaranteeing the profits of its rich over the livelihoods of its working and poor. This winter is going to be extremely cold. This weekend, it is going to get as low as 17 degrees. Next week is going to be colder. I have a hell of a time being out there for an hour, and people are going to sleep outside tonight. It's unconscionable, and we need to do something as soon as possible. We need to fully fund the shelter. We need to repeal 14-417 and 14-418. We need to do as much as possible as a bare minimum to keeping people alive, because that's all these requests are just keeping people alive. This isn't even asking for some utopian vision of the future. This is the bare minimum to make sure people don't die, and I genuinely hope the city that I call home can provide that for my friends, neighbors, community members. I just don't want to see people die this winter. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Lorenz. I'm here supporting the Sunrise Movement tonight. But first, I want to say that we're going to briefly say some things about climate action in Lawrence, but we don't want to detract from the statements that have been made already. I'm pretty moved by the passion and the eloquence and the organization of the folks tonight who are speaking about the housing issues in Lawrence. And we know that the weather is going to get more extreme, and climate change affects the most vulnerable and marginalized people first. And so we stand in solidarity with people who are unhoused, and we would love to see more efforts and resources placed in that direction. And so I also want to thank the commissioners who have, I believe, all given us some time and energy to starting some climate discussions. So I'll end by thanking you and hopefully thanking you in advance for continuing this conversation.
All right. Hello, my name is Matthew Dunn, live on 6th Street. So I'm with the Sunrise Movement, which is an organization of young people fighting for a livable future. So for the past several months, we've been asking Lawrence residents to sign a petition supporting the declaration of a climate emergency by this commission. As of tonight, we have over 600 signatures in support of this declaration. So one question that we are frequently asked is, what is a climate emergency? So we don't have time tonight to go into the history of climate change or the dire situation we face now at the end of 2019. But I'd like to submit the following document titled, What is the Climate Emergency?, which was published by the Climate Mobilization Project. In short, in order to avoid catastrophic changes to our climate, we need to act to reduce emissions and ensure climate resilience as quickly as possible on every level of government, including right here at home. So declaring a climate emergency is the first step. It will provide a framework to ensure that every decision this commission makes, from from transportation to approving new development is made with deep consideration of climate justice. We can't address this problem without acknowledging its enormity, its urgency, and its most effective solutions. So we ask that you make this declaration either tonight or add your consideration to the next City Commission meeting agenda. So, and if anyone in the audience tonight would like to sign this position, please come and see us. Thank you very much.
Hi, Michael Allman again. And I'm with Sustainability Action Network. We, as various other local groups, are aligned with the Sunrise Movement in addressing climate disruption. Our organization has been looking into this and working on various programs since 2007, primarily relating to energy issues, which of course is tied in with emissions. Right now, as you probably know, the United Nations Conference of the Parties Climate Conference is going on in Madrid. This is the 25th annual climate conference, and they're still trying to figure out the rule book. It's getting very frustrating when, over the years, the situation gets more and more extreme, the climate gets more and more radical and disruptive, and very little happens, if anything, at the international level, at the national level, or at the state level. And so most people in most communities are now working at the local level because it's where we can be most effective, where we all know each other, we can work hand in hand and directly face to face. So that's kind of what we're asking, that at this level, that we declare a climate emergency and acknowledge that the situation is getting more dire. If you look at any of the data out there, the data sets are going off the charts. I mean, they've been projecting since the 90s or even earlier what's happening right now. But since at that point, nobody was really listening in the 90s or the 80s. But now we can't ignore that data anymore. I mean, what was predicted is in fact showing up, on the planet in reality, year after year with major brush fires and wildfires, extreme tornado and hurricane events, on and on and on. It's not that the winters are not going to be cold or the summers are not going to be hot. It's going to be much colder in the winter and much hotter in the summer. Last night was a good example. It just means that there's more extremes, more fluctuation, and if at the local level we're not going to address this, we need to be reducing our carbon footprint, and cumulatively, community by community is doing this, and in conjunction with everybody else, we will be able to reduce the carbon footprint of the entire planet, but it takes individual actions in individual communities to get there. Thank you.
My name is Kira McPherson. I'm a member of Sunrise Movement. I'm working on the city climate plan for the Sustainability Board, but I'm here tonight as a private citizen. Leadership during the Anthropocene is going to challenge you in unprecedented ways. No councilor, no mayor, no municipal staff in the history of Lawrence has ever had to deal with the magnitude of the emergency ahead of you. You're going to have to be smart enough and strong enough to ignore short-sighted, destructive embraces of lobbyists, developers, and other climate denialists. You're going to have to be smart enough and strong enough to guide your people through political, emotional, and physical unrest. This isn't some environmentally inconvenient stance that complicates business for the Chamber of Commerce. This is literally about the survival of our town. A warming planet with rising levels of CO2 and methane means more water vapor in the atmosphere. More water vapor means more extreme weather events, more extreme temperatures, both high and low, more frequently. In other words, the weather's going to be weatherier. Winters will have more intense blizzards more often. There will be more days of lethal cold interspersed with unusually warm days. There will be more lightning and tornadoes in the spring. They will occur more frequently with more destructive potential. There will be more catastrophic rainfall events and more life-threateningly hot summer days. Local humidity will increase, making it even harder to keep animals and humans safe without adequate shelter and cooling. There will be food shortages from crop failures, both financial and health crises for Kansas. The first obvious signs of Lawrence's climate crisis will almost certainly be water-related droughts and floods. Lawrence will be unmanageable, unsustainable, unlivable in 50 years if we don't aggressively adapt now, if every action in the every municipal department isn't made with this reality in mind. That is a huge statement, but I stand by it. Climate scientists and disaster mitigation experts are begging cities to start planning, budgeting, prepping, and retrofitting. Thousands of scientists of the world stand by these statements with urgent and indeed frantic sincerity. When the tornado sirens sounded last spring, it meant there was a chance a storm would hit us, a chance, not a sure thing. We took that chance seriously because that's what a responsible city does in Tornado Alley. They protect their people with intelligent preparation. Climate scientists are currently batting 100% with their predictions. The only thing they have been wrong about is the timing. They thought it would take 100 years to get to where we are now. We have crucial feedback loops failing, devastating domino effects of northern ice sheets and acidic oceans. Failing to prepare our city now is like turning off the sirens and ignoring weather reports because when a massive tornado is headed to Lawrence.
Thank you,
I
Karen.
wish from the bottom of my heart this was hyperbole.
Thank you, Karen.
Declaring an official climate crisis will send a message to your citizens that you take the future of this town seriously. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Yes, Carrie Altenburn. I live on Forest Avenue. And I first became really involved with environmentalism as a result of the first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. And that got me interested in many things. One of my degrees I got from KU is in environmental studies. And what I learned that was the potential to happen is happening. And it's happening, everything we were taught that was a possibility is no longer a possibility. It is a reality. And it, as was said before, it's coming on a lot faster than anybody expected. Some people may scoff, well, if the federal government isn't doing anything about it, do we really need to worry about it, or can we do anything about it? And I'd like to point out that the strongest movements are always grassroots. If the government in Washington won't do something, then the government in Lawrence needs to do something. And to declare a climate emergency is showing that we as the citizens of Lawrence take this seriously, and that everybody else in this country should follow along and take it seriously too. I'm getting old, so I'm probably going to miss the worst of the climate catastrophe that's coming. But my children aren't, and if I ever have grandchildren, they won't. So it's long past time to take action, but it's not too late for us to take action on declaring an emergency. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. I did hear a couple of allegations of crimes occurring from one commenter in particular, and I did want to open up an opportunity for that individual who clearly would likely not feel comfortable going to law enforcement to speak either to our city manager or someone that he would designate to have that conversation, to our review board, or if that individual, and I think I saw that individual left, so if anyone is connected to that individual, I would be happy to be in the room for that conversation as well. So I think that would be the main thing to pass on to staff in regard to the public comment. And then
yeah, off the top of my head, obviously, if they'll approach my office, we'll make sure this get appropriate, appropriate meetings set up so that we can understand that concern. I think there are also some other third-party agencies that may be also better intermediaries for that, which I don't have off the top of my head. But I would absolutely encourage everybody that feels like they're a victim, as was described, to absolutely seek assistance, and we want to support the investigation of any of those concerns.
Okay. Thank you. So we will move on to our commission items. Anybody have future agenda items to add?
Nope.
I do. We need to look at our boards and committees relatively soon. And we typically, well, in my experience, we did that in January.
Yeah.
And I know that we do have a fairly packed agenda for our next meeting, so I didn't know if there was some urgency around needing to do that at our next meeting, or if we could do that in January. I know that there may be an appointment or two that needs to be made before the end of the year, which we might need to address, but I'm not sure.
I think usually, January's fine with me.
You
Our
talking
first
about-
one's the 7th.
You talking about city
Yeah.
commissioners?
Our
Yeah,
positions
those
on-
boards, yeah.
On boards, yeah.
Yeah.
Is everyone okay with doing that in January?
7th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
Do you need a motion on that?
That's typically an item we have for you all to do anyway, so we're not really adding something new.
No, I think it's just something to think about before we get there. And I think Bobby will be sending out a list. Any future work session items to add?
Nope.
I think that regarding the Sunrise Movement's request to declare a climate emergency could be a conversation for us to have as we talk about timing of looking at our sustainability plan, and possibly having a conversation around that being some sort of a kickoff opportunity where we put some urgency into creating that plan and engaging our community in that plan. So I don't know if it would necessarily be a study session item, but it could be to look at, whether or not that's language that we would be interested in bringing in, or any thoughts on that?
Well, the Sustainability Board, they're overseeing the climate protection plan redo, so to speak. So is that something that we would work through them? Is that?
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Really think that's what they're designed for.
Yeah, that's it's kind of, yeah.
So we could recommend that they take a look at that and bring it back to us if that's something they would find appropriate.
Yeah. I think so.
Any other future work session items? Any other items?
I got one.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about how we're doing the signage on our roundabouts. At 19th and Barker, the cars that approach the roundabout have a yield to pedestrian sign, and as they exit, I believe there's also a yield to pedestrian sign. So you're getting on both sides of the crosswalk. At Wakarusa and Harvard, I think it's only the vehicles that are entering the roundabout that have the pedestrian sign. There's no yield to pedestrian sign as you're exiting the roundabout. So I'd like for staff to take a look at that and just let us know what what we're doing and if we're being consistent.
You want an agenda item on that?
No, that's a
This was
commission
other
item.
items.
Oh, okay, sorry if I
Yeah,
didn't.
this is just a commission item, it's a concern. Okay, thanks.
Any other items? I wanted to let you all know that my kids' holiday performance is next Tuesday, because evidently that's the only day on which they can do that. So I will likely be here around 7 when that ends. So Brad will be picking up the gavel real quick into his career as vice mayor. So, but I will be here after that performance. I just wanted to let everyone know.
Gladly give you the gavel back.
I think that we have an opportunity. I'm adding this as another item because I don't know that we're necessarily ready to have conversations in a cohesive way about looking at some of the ordinances that were mentioned. I appreciated the suggestions from our public commenters, particularly around the camping ordinance and the aggressive panhandling ordinance. I wonder if, we made our funding decisions in regard to the budget, and we'll have that a conversation again in the budget. But in the meantime, are there ways that we can work through policy to have a positive impact on those individuals experiencing houselessness in our community? And I kind of wanted to gauge interest in having that kind of a conversation where we can have a positive impact on those folks.
I do know we've recently started to do some work or work with some of the camps that are in the area. I guess it is to kind of help alleviate some of the situations there as far as allowing. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have not enforced to the letter of that ordinance. We also have made provisions, or we're in the process of making provisions to provide some basic facilities where we know that people, houseless people, are gathering and congregating, known places, and just handling it differently than maybe we have in the past, particularly when it's been so cold.
So if we're not enforcing an ordinance that we have, maybe it is time to take a look at whether or not we want to amend that ordinance or have a conversation about it further, maybe not immediately, but at some point.
Yeah, I think I would like to take a look at it and read it some before making a decision.
Okay. So maybe that's something we can bring back as commission item when we're ready to add it as an agenda item, if that's something we choose to do. Okay.
Have a chance to look at it.
Okay. Any other items? All right. Calendar.
So I've got on there a ribbon cutting for the 19th, but that has been canceled, so we'll need to remove that.
Anything else? Okay. I think we're ready to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Larson, second from Commissioner Bowley. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we will move on to our work session.
Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. Y'all ready?
Ready.
Okay, we are ready to come back for our work session.
Yeah.
All right, we are back. The work session provides an opportunity for the City Commission to discuss items in greater detail. As a general practice, the Commission will not make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Public comment related to the work session topics will be allowed at the end of the discussion on each item. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. Item 1 on our work session is to receive a report from the Teamsters Local 696 regarding Resolution number 6817 as it relates to employee organizations.
Thank you. I have a handout I'd like to hand up. Do I give that to the city clerk? Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Matthew Hall, and I'm a Lawrence resident, and I'm also the Secretary-Treasurer for Teamsters Local 696. Now, the Teamsters, we represent workers in the northern half of Kansas. We have members at UPS here in Lawrence, First Transit here at Lawrence, and also P1 Group here in Lawrence as well. We represent a variety of public and private sector workers throughout the state, ranging from correction officers to nurses to clerks to drivers. When you get a package at your home, that's a Teamster that does that. When your child has cold, safe milk at school, that's a Teamster that delivered that. When your child goes to school on a school bus and is delivered safe, that's a Teamster that made sure that happened. We're part of the community and we're your neighbors. Our local has recently been contacted by a group of workers that work for the city of Lawrence. They would like to join our union and be represented at the city. We have met with them, and we are confident that we can help them improve their standard of living. We're also confident we can help the city as a whole, improving working conditions and helping the city keep trained, talented, and bright employees that you currently have. Union contracts improve community services when we sit down and listen to what workers want and what workers need. Union contracts add stability and consistency to cities. Union contracts give protections to whistleblowers to help our residents, and in some cases can save lives. Union contracts give a clear and structured mechanism to workers and to management to resolve conflicts that rise at the workplace, and in the long run save time and energy for both union employees and for management. Union contracts give a better quality of life for workers and for citizens. The obstacle in the way of these workers enjoying the same rights that surrounding communities have here is the current ordinance concerning employee organizations. What we're here to talk to you today is reforming that ordinance and modernizing the process to allow workers the freedom to choose for themselves if they want representation and who they can be represented with. The current ordinance that you guys have in front of you have our changes we're proposing to the current ordinance. The current ordinance as it stands sets up an unnecessary barrier in the way of employees being able to make a fair and free choice. It has two employee groups that are set up by department and by job classifications. These units are police and fire. The other two groups that encompass giant bargaining units spanning the rest of the city. These being 3, clerical, technical, and admin support, and 4, service, maintenance, and skilled labor. Groups 3 and 4 have workers that don't share a community of interest. They don't do the same jobs. They don't work in the same conditions. They don't interact with each other. And they don't have the same needs. This sets an impossibly high standard for the majority of employees that work for the city and is a barrier to those employees. This is also contrary to the standards that are set up through federal and state law. This means that Lawrence is behind in its ordinance than the rest of the state of Kansas. It also means that some workers with the city are being held to a different standard when it comes to their right for collective bargaining. In addition to the bargaining unit sizes, the manner in which the vote is to be conducted is undemocratic. It essentially counts every vote not cast as an automatic no vote. This essentially stacks the deck against any vote in order to form a union that employees would undertake. Once again, this is contrary to federal and to Kansas state standards, and is our view contrary to basic democratic standards. A better system would be to implement counting the majority of votes cast, as is done in every single other election we do in America. This ordinance also limits the choices that employees can have when it comes to who they want as representation. Instead of being able to join an organization of their choosing, it limits the scope and forces employees to have the choices that the city allows. It's our strong view that employees should be able to decide for themselves what representation they should have. It should not be the employer's decision. In fact, we believe it's a conflict of interest for the employer to have a say and to limit the scope of the representation that employees can choose. Once again, this is contrary to federal and to Kansas state standards. Finally, we have an issue with the time frame in which the process should take place. The ordinance lays out a year for this election. This puts unnecessary barriers and hoops in place and limits when employees can freely and fairly choose when they would like to have a union election. Once again, this is contrary to federal and Kansas state standards. Now, we are happy that the city of Lawrence has decided to adopt ordinance to allow employees to have a seat at the table. All we're asking for today is to modernize this ordinance and to allow, that's already on the books, to give all employees a real chance to actually enjoy it and have the benefits of it. It's not only important for communities, but this is also employees, but this is also important for our communities. It's a reflection of our community, of how we treat our public servants. It reflects our values as a community. Lawrence is a community that cares about our neighbors and a community that celebrates inclusion. We ask that these same values that makes our community thrive be included in this ordinance. I'm available for any questions you guys might have.
Any questions?
So you're proposing essentially 7 more?
Correct. We represent workers over in Shawnee County and Topeka as well, and there are a variety of more bargaining units over there.
So
essentially, a parks worker, I'm sorry, excuse me.
So essentially, each group would have its own contract? Is that how that works?
Or under Shawnee County, we represent multiple units. We have a master agreement, and then there are sub-units under there.
Okay, so that is a master agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
If the employees choose to unionize through the Teamsters or choose to unionize through their own organization, it should be those employees' choice of what they want to do and how they want to do it is our position.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Matt, do you have an idea about the size of these various bargaining units that you proposed?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not have the sizes in front of it.
So these groups, have they actually each approached you, each one of these?
Not every group.
Is that how you divided it down?
Not every group,
Okay.
but we have been approached by a group that would want Teamster representation.
Okay.
We have the majority of workers have signed cards giving their intention that they want Teamster representation.
So we don't know if these other departments or areas that they want to be unionized, is that correct?
It should be their choice completely.
Okay.
If they want to be unionized, they should have that option, but they shouldn't force to be unionized or shouldn't force to be in a union they don't want to be in.
Okay.
And that's our intention, is to allow workers the freedom to choose for themselves whether they want to be in a union or not.
Okay.
Other questions?
So I gathered from the way it was written before, there was kind of like a catch-all like everyone else, but the way you have it defined, there would be certain people now, maybe administrative assistants or somebody, I mean, would there be people that couldn't unionize under these categories, or do you think these categories cover every non-supervisor employee?
We don't have all the employee job classifications. Honestly, to be quite frank with you.
Oh, I see.
Our intention is to cover every job classification with the city.
Okay, I see. And is it uncommon in other jurisdictions to have a time frame? It seems like with the way statutory budgets are set up that there would be a time frame in which you would do that, but is that uncommon in other locations?
Once you have a contract, you set timeframes of when that contract's going to be negotiated. What we're asking for is a time frame when the vote could happen. Because under PIRA, which is the Kansas state law under NLRB, you could actually file the initial vote at any time.
I see.
Not just during the initial month. We're not talking about timeframes of when to do the contract negotiations, of just when to do the election to form a union, is all that we're asking for.
And right now, ours says it between January and February.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct?
We don't want to change anything that you guys are doing with contract negotiations. Our understanding is, talking to the fire union, they're happy with the contract negotiations and the process. Our intention is not to change any of that. I should not speak for them, though.
Other questions? Are we going to be hearing from staff or anyone else? Okay.
Yeah. So what would I guess I have a question. What would the process be to begin the evaluation of this in depth, and what you would recommend?
Well, I'd like to see a copy. That might be
Okay, so you
one
haven't
step.
seen a copy?
Unless is it the same one that you
It's similar.
sent
There's
to
a
us?
couple changes that I've gotten from what I sent to you,
hadn't heard 7
Craig.
categories that seem new.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, it's kind of hard when we just got this, which is okay.
Some of the changes are actually in response to our conversations we've had, Craig, about the forming of the units.
I guess I'm not so concerned about the actual details, but what would the process look like going forward if?
Well, with any public policy, there's a cause and effect, so we'd want to look at these proposed changes and anticipate what unintended consequences there may be, adjusting to a resolution that's been in place for some time, though it's been changed before, and see what the impact would be, not only on the other bargaining units, but also on staff or management's relationship with this, and how we would be properly resourced to respond to these changes, and especially with the sequencing, changing the sequences of when these could happen. We'd want to make sure that we're ready for and able to respond to and be accountable for the process. So I'd say that's my general statement. We could come back to you in a week or two and say these are the things that we want to address, or maybe lay out a process to consider these.
Okay.
2 weeks might be rough because we won't be here.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm interested in the history of Resolution 6817. I went back and looked at it, and the action that was taken in 2009 was a minor adjustment to the dates, and I haven't been able to track it back to essentially the origin. So I'm very interested in the history of this document, and so if staff can provide me with some of that history, I would be very grateful.
So,
Go ahead. No, please.
I got a question for you, Matt.
Yeah.
So if the employees decided to unionize based on whatever groups that we come up with,
Correct.
would they be required to use you?
No.
Could they just be on their own?
That's our intention, is to have them have a free and fair choice.
Okay.
If they want to form their own association, that's fine. But if they want to be Teamsters, and we have a group that has told us they want to be Teamsters, we believe they should be able to be Teamsters.
Okay.
But all employees should not be forced to be Teamsters if they don't want to be.
Is there any way to combine any of these? We've taken 4 bargaining units and made them into 11. Is there any way to kind of put some of these together so that we don't have so many different bargaining units, we don't have so many contracts?
The basis of this should be they share a community of interest, and that's the basis of NLRB and of PIRA as well, that they do similar jobs, they have similar working conditions, and they report to the same place. We'd be open and happy to help city staff look at this and talk about this with the idea of sharing a community of interest. But yeah, we'd be willing to be part of that conversation to reform that.
I mean, I'm interested in the master agreement. It seems like that would be one way to maybe manage the number of groups. It'd be nice to have less groups, I think, but also maybe a master agreement and then work from that.
Under Shawnee County, every single group was organized separately, and the master agreement then covered them. Once again, if, say nurses over in Shawnee County wanted to be Teamsters, they became Teamsters. If they didn't want to be, though, they should have their own rights and own obligations to form whatever organization they saw fit to. It should be their decision is the key thing, and their free and fair choice.
Is the master agreement, is that for only those bargaining units that are represented by Teamsters?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we had 8 different unions, then we'd have 8 different contracts. We wouldn't have a master contract. And it's not our choice as to which union they'd be going with. So that's kind of hard to.
That is. It would make it hard.
Other questions?
Maybe I just want to clarify something, Craig, that you said. When you're talking about maybe needing more, I'm not sure what you said, but manpower to, if we had up to 11 units, that might be something that will require the hiring of someone to handle all those, not just to get them set up initially, but to moving forward. Is that one of your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, just the time that we've spent on reaching agreement with the 2 existing bargaining units was substantial, and to be done thoughtfully and carefully. And by doubling that, or in this case, multiplying that many times, that is something we really need to make sure that we have capacity to undertake. It's not an obstacle. It's just saying that it's like anything. If you have more roads, you need to have more crews to take care of those roads.
Right.
If we have a lot more demands on different negotiations, and there's several contracts, not just to negotiate, but then also to make sure that we're doing what we're obligated to do administratively, and that we're in compliance with agreements regularly, that would be something we'd want to make sure we don't shortchange. That's what I meant to say.
And I think as far as time savings, there would be a time savings as far as having a clear grievance procedure and a clear contract for both parties that would know. It would give conflict resolution. It'd be easier for conflict resolution to be solved and would save time with that, is our position on that. Because you currently have 300 or so employees don't have a mechanism of conflict resolution through a grievance procedure.
We don't? We don't have a grievance procedure?
We do.
Yeah, I thought so.
But it's done internally, correct?
Yeah, it's established in our personnel rules and regulations that are available to all of our employees.
Yeah, so there's a process.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we'll open it up for public comment.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. Just the word Teamsters sends a chill down my spine. It wasn't that long ago that the Teamsters were under receivership of the federal government. Receivership or trusteeship, I don't know what it was. But I think that grew out of corruption. Just ask Jimmy Hoffa and Frank Fitzsimmons. But it's obvious listening to the commission here, there is no expertise or no base of knowledge to get into this kind of discussion or negotiation. I think there needs to be a lot of education going on here. The Teamsters are noted for getting a lot of good pay and benefits for their members. That means that I am going to have to dig into my wallet and pay more in taxes, because salaries and benefits for public employees, city employees of Lawrence will go up. And I think we need to have some kind of a vetting process to make sure that the Teamsters are on the up and up, and they aren't going back to their old ways of doing things. Because there were people who, if they went afoul of the Teamsters, they had their kneecaps broken. We don't need that. And so we need to step back here, and we need to build a depth of information and experience, because I don't think we have it now. We heard the former mayor say, well, don't our present city employees have a grievance procedure? Wow. Somebody sitting on the commission doesn't know that? So I think we're really into some really deep water here, and I think the potential is that this could go bad. And I think we need to get the expertise, information to so the city can go on with this with all eyes open. And I think we need to get in touch with the U.S. Department of Labor and say, what's the status of the Teamsters now? Are they well out of their receivership and trusteeship? Are there problems looming on the horizon? Who knows?
Good evening. Well, I belong to let me start off. 31 years for the International Union of
Can you
Elevators.
state your name, please?
Dale Crane, I'm sorry. Dale Crane. I was 31 years with the International Union of Elevator Constructors. For the last 6 years, I've been working for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And the gentleman before me says you guys should be educated. Well, guess what? You guys, the federal government has an office in our building in Washington, D.C. They audit us. So before you say that we're a bunch of knee breakers and stuff like that.
Make your comments to the commissioner, please.
I'm sorry. It's just wrong for somebody to say something like that. We have an auditor in our building in Washington, D.C. It's been there for 10 years. They audit us. I'm only allowed to, and I've been caught, only allowed to give 20% tip just on a dinner or whatever I do. A $15 bill, I give the person $5. Well, I have to write a check for the difference of the 20%. We are audited to the penny. And we're not out there breaking legs and not out doing those types of things. To answer to another question, the gentleman over here said that you have a grievance process. Yes, you do. Who is the employer that has, it's the employer that has the grievance process. So you're going to the employer and saying, I have a problem. Well, who does the HR person work for? He works for the city. He doesn't work for anybody else but the city. So that doesn't make any sense to go to somebody and say, I have a problem. You understand where the conflict is there? I'm sure you do. You guys are all very smart people. So that is not a true grievance problem or grievance procedure to me. So that's all I have to say. Hope I answered some questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Chad Osdale. I work for MSO, and I am one of the unrepresented employees that has my merit raise not funded because we get a GWA this year. And nobody says anything about it. They just make the decision. We have no say of any of our benefits. You people make the decisions, discuss it among yourselves, and tell us what we get. This is why the union's here. I have gone through our appeal process from my evaluations, and asking 8 questions through 2 meetings and having no answers given to me, and given the paperwork afterwards and told by my department head, all your questions have been answered. Your job evaluation scores match your job performance, and this is over. That is not an appeal process. There should be some questions answered.
Other public comment? Thank you. I think we have one more.
Mike Scribner, Mayetta, Kansas, President of Teamsters Local 696. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to say, my entire professional life has been in public service. I was in the military. I'm a disabled combat veteran. I've worked in the state penitentiary in Lansing. I worked in the military prison in Leavenworth. I've worked in Shawnee County Department of Corrections. That's when I became a Teamster, about 27 years ago. And we worked under this master agreement because we had addendums for other areas in the county, and it worked great. And not giving employees the opportunity to choose should be a crime. Thank you.
Okay, we will bring it back up to the commission.
Okay. I was reminded by public comment that I had intended to disclose that I'm a union member. I've been a member of the National Treasury Employees Union for about 35 years. I served as a manager of an audit group 37 years ago and for a couple years, and when I went back to the bargaining unit, I joined the union, and I've been a member ever since. So just, I don't say that that's expertise, but it's experience. And I guess I'd add to that that as a federal union, it was an independent union. We did not bargain over salaries and benefits. It was really focused on working conditions and those kinds of issues.
Thanks, Soren. Thoughts?
I think, the question is whether or not to open up the resolution for changes. Is that kind of where we're, possibilities?
I'd say it's a primary question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and we're not going to vote on that tonight anyway, so.
So it might be.
I'm interested in getting the information about provenance of the agreement. I also asked a question about attrition from the various bargaining units. You know, that's stuff I'm interested in getting more information from staff.
Okay, so we are interested in hearing more. Is there consensus around that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely hear more. Did you mention, get an idea of the number of people within?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pertinent information too.
As to the potential number of people in each unit that they've proposed here?
I think that particularly on the three areas that I heard from Matthew, the divisions, which has been the primary focus of our conversation, but also the voting recommendations, as well as the times for election, I would like to hear the impact that those things may have, and if there are any other suggestions from staff, I would be interested in hearing those as well. If we're going to crack it open, then we should take a full gander.
I guess another question would be, do we have any information about the number of grievances that we've handled? I think that might be pertinent as well. If there's a discrepancy between the units that currently have union representation and the ones that don't, that would be an interesting aspect of it.
What about the, would it be appropriate at that time to look at the costs? Because we're talking about the possibility of having additional employees in order to oversee properly oversee it anyway. Staffing costs.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, do our current contracts with either the police and fire require us to consult with them if we made any changes to this?
Well, they don't require, but I think it'd be a good idea.
Well, I know, but I mean, could we do it without their?
Sure.
I mean,
Well, I think it's your discretion to amend the resolution. I don't know about the contract language in your existing contracts about any triggers were the resolution to be modified. There aren't any that we know of. So it'd be up to your discretion to do that. But obviously, they're going to have probably some thoughts on anything that impacts the way we've been handling business for the last several years.
Well, I guess what I was, and that sounds right to me. I mean, I noticed as one of the examples, there was, certain things in the scope of discussions, and there was a recommendation you remove one of the things from the list of things to be discussed. And I didn't know if we could do that with going on a contract with the fire and police. Could we remove certain things, or maybe I assume we could. We probably have the ultimate authority, but it seems like we'd want to, especially with 2 contracts coming up, right? Don't we have both fire and police this year?
We do. Stop me or correct me if I misspeak, but I think this sets the ground rules for those. It doesn't invalidate an existing agreement. So
Okay.
those agreements that stay in place until they expire, and then we would be negotiating under the resolution, any changes to the resolution under those ground rules and in those parameters.
So the timing of this would be important if we're going to, we'd have to have the ground rules set before we start the negotiations, I would suggest.
Yes.
Well, I think that also goes to, you were talking earlier about looking at all the potential consequences of the changes, potential proposed changes.
Right.
We'd have to look at that.
The only thing that I would add is that our agreements that we have currently with police and fire do refer to our current resolution. But as Craig said, we would not intend or be modifying any of the terms of our current contract.
Well, certainly we'd want fire and police involved in any changes to the ground rules if we're going to look at those.
I also want to step in defense of internal grievance procedures as someone who's in compliance.
I was hoping you'd say that.
My job is to be a neutral and unbiased fact finder, and I am very specific in my position that I am not representing the university. I'm representing our policy and whether or not our policy has been violated. So it is possible. I trust that our staff has made hires who have the integrity that I have in the position that I have and the work that I do. And if that is not the case, then that should be addressed. But I don't think that you can bang the drum of a lack of integrity in those kinds of positions.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. Anything else on this? Okay. So was there anything else?
Do you need anything else?
I think that covers it. Maybe a time frame for your expectations to get back. I'm sure Mr. Hall would be interested in that as well. Kind of when do you want this information, this research and response back? And I think, maybe to problems solving right now, but if you think you'd like for us to take a crack at a better construction of instead of 11 categories, is there one that we might recommend to comprehensively address all groups that would be less than 11, but more than 4?
Yeah, I would hope that you would take a crack at it.
Okay.
I would expect that.
I'd just like to kind of get that direction, so.
As well as any of the other language changes that they're offering up. And I think that would go back to looking at unintended consequences.
Okay.
So I think that we're making a relatively large ask Is there a kind of time frame that you would ask for in order to look into that?
But as far as us getting back, months, 3 weeks,
With holidays, at least a month.
month, 30 days.
Okay, so in January?
Mid-January,
See that back.
somewhere in there.
Okay. Does that seem reasonable?
Hey, if that's what it takes.
They're doing the work.
Okay,
Thank you. Yep. Oops, sorry.
thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, so we will move on to number 2, receive economic development overview.
We're 10 minutes behind. We're 10 minutes behind.
Commissioners, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I will kick this item off here for you. As you know, you'll be going into strategic planning and talking about that here with the new year. And in preparing you for some of those discussions, we thought we would provide you a really high-level overview of the city's economic development work and our role in economic development, and also the work of the partners that the city funds. And so we prepared a rather brief presentation for you this evening that would be pretty high level. We tried to have about 20 minutes of comments for you between city staff and then the 3 different partner agencies that the city funds. And we will talk a little bit about economic development data and some of our tracking of various statistics related to economic development, our overall return on the city's economic development investments, what the city's role is in economic development, and how we work with policies and those sorts of things. The Chamber and Economic Development Corporation is represented by Steve Kelly here this evening, and he's going to talk about the Chamber's role in work with economic development. And G.R. Underwood and Adam Courtney are here with the Bioscience Technology Business Center, the BTBC. And Kevin Kelly is here with Peasley Tech. And we will just provide a overview for you, beginning with Britt, and we'll just kind of flow through. We're happy to respond to questions as we go through the presentation or at the end of the presentation, whatever's most convenient for you. So I'll turn it over to Britt to begin and start the presentation for you.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Give me just a sec, I'll get our presentation going. What I'm going to do is briefly touch on a few of the key economic indicators that we track for economic development, and then I'll wrap up my presentation with some of the performance metrics of the projects that participate in our economic development programs. Before I start on the stats, I just want to provide a little bit of a caveat. That we use federal government data. We use the most recently published federal government data, and sometimes there can be a time lag in that. Most of the statistics on the economic indicators is for 2018. That data was just released about 2 weeks ago. We do have one data set that is for 2017, and that was released this past summer. So given that, the other thing I wanted to let you know is the Lawrence MSA refers to all of Douglas County, according to the federal government. So if it says Lawrence MSA, we're talking about all of Douglas County. There are some stats that are just for the city of Lawrence. So to begin with, population and per capita income, 2018, population of about 121,400, and the per capita personal income of 43,600 and some. Labor force, employment and unemployment. Our labor force in 2018 was a little over 65,000. Approximately 2,000 of those workers or potential workers were unemployed, so our unemployment rate was at 3.1%. And I think graphs kind of show this a little. I'm a visual person, so I always like graphs. Anyway, I think with this particular one, you can see the effect of the recession, post-recessionary years, and how we had to recover from that. So our employment growth was down, and it has steadily been increasing. The change year over year is relatively small. Over the last 5 years, about a 2% increase in employment growth, and over the last 10 years, about a 6.1% total. Unemployment, that is exactly inversely proportional to the employment growth. So again, you're going to see a higher unemployment rate in the post-recessionary years, and it slowly declines until we're down to the 3.1% that I had mentioned. Commuting stats, I think this is always something of interest to our community. This is, the stats I'm going to show you right now are only for the city of Lawrence. This is the 2017 data I was talking about. This is put out by the Census Bureau, and this came out this past summer. I like their graph because I think it visually explains kind of our commuter situation. And you can see we have a little over 19,600 that commute into the city to work, approximately 20,000 that live here and work here, and then about 22,500 that commute out for work. And to look at that a little bit further, if you're looking at all the workers here in Lawrence, about 50% of them live here and about 50% of them commute in. The largest area that they're commuting from is the Kansas City Metro and also Topeka. The other area, the grayed area, is all those other areas that they're coming from, which could be unincorporated Douglas County or smaller areas that are just too small to be graphed out here. So it's going to be surrounding communities for the most part. Okay, this is the, yeah.
So do they provide more detailed data on all the others, or they just give it to you this way with all others?
You can go down further. You can go down by salary category, but there's only 3 categories that you can get into in terms of that. So you can look at where these people are coming and going based on their salary level.
I guess I meant it seemed to me that rural Douglas County, I mean, people live in the unincorporated area of Douglas County would be greater than like 1% of Baldwin, just anecdotally. There's a lot of people in my law firm that live in the county. There's a lot of people, I mean, who live. So I just wondered if they broke it down by the county.
They don't break it down any further. I don't know if they can be, if the researchers can be contacted and we could get the raw data and see kind of where we, what makes up that 31% or 25%. So again, this is these are the people who live in Lawrence that are employees, and so the ones that live and work in Lawrence make up about 47%. The ones that are commuting out make up about 53%. And again, you can kind of see the various areas, and I don't think it's any surprise that again, a lot of people are commuting out to the metro. Kansas City Metro as well as Topeka, because we are almost halfway in between both of those. Wages.
Brett, so could you explain the difference between the Lawrence area workforce again? I didn't quite catch that versus the Lawrence employment.
These are the people who live in Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
Half of 47% of them work here, and then we have another 53% who commute out for their jobs. Does that make sense?
Got it.
Okay. Wages and salary for employment, wage and salary employment for 2018 was $57,700 and over almost 800. Average wages and salaries per job was $37,655. These are all inflation adjusted numbers, by the way. Again, I think the graphs, can show you some interesting trends along here. And so, again, it may not answer it may not answer what's going on, but sometimes you look at these graphs and you go, oh, okay, maybe we do need to dig a little bit further. The other thing that we don't really do that I guess I should mention that I think it would be something that would be very helpful to do if we ever got into developing an economic development strategic plan is to start doing some benchmarking with some peer communities. We'd have to decide which peer communities we'd want to benchmark against, but that would be something that we might want to look at so we can see how we're doing it with our neighbors. There is one data set that we do that on, and this is the percent of commercial real estate valuation compared to the total. So we do look at some of our neighboring communities. Lawrence stays pretty steady at about 30% commercial, and you can see other neighbors are much higher, some are lower. Again, a graph kind of depicts where we're at with all of that. Now, the reason this is important, I think, is because it deals with property tax revenues and how much we get. Because the state, and I've done a little example here, the state legislature says that we have to assess commercial property at 25%. But residential property at 11.5. And then there's also another state law that gives an exemption to residential property. So I just did an apples-to-apples comparison. Most of the time, commercial property probably is going to appraise much higher than this. Residential may appraise lower or higher. But I just wanted to start with apples to apples and show you the difference in tax revenues that would be realized with our new 2019 mill levy based on if the property was commercial or residential. And you can see commercial property brings in over double what a residential property that is valued at the same amount would be. Our annual economic development report, this is getting into our performance metrics. We do this every year. It's a very thick report. It tries to cover as much information as we possibly can. It basically talks about our ED programs, the projects that are participating in that program, those programs, and then how they are performing. So just briefly, this report started only as a tax abatement report, and it started many, many years ago, way before my time. And so when I came on board, then I started to add in our other programs. So there still is quite an emphasis on tax abatement performance because of that history. So that's one of the reasons why we still have, kind of this whole performance metrics around these tax abatement properties. These are non-catalyst programs, but for the companies that received a tax abatement in 2018, they definitely substantially outperformed all the projections. Real property investment was up 122%, full-time wages up 171%. We projected 173 jobs that would be created by these companies, and 468 were actually created. Company wages, again, are higher than projected. They are higher than our private sector average wage, and they're also much higher than our wage floor that we use on some of our economic development policies. These companies also still pay property taxes. So of the companies that got this property tax abatement, they had approximately 44% abated, and then they paid the rest. So even while these properties are going under the abatement, they are still paying property tax. And I think one of the more important things about these properties is these projects and these companies is they are primary job employers, which means that most of the revenue that they are getting is being imported into our communities. It's coming from outside our community and coming into our community, which is how you grow the economic wealth in a community. And so you can see here that, again, almost 100% of their sales are coming from outside the community and being imported in. In general, overall, for all of our economic development programs, we realize about 18 cents in private investment for every dollar of public investment. And I do also want to mention neighborhood revitalization area projects. We do have quite a few of those. Those are not, NRAs are not a job creation economic development. It's a revitalization program, but it does give us a really decent return on investment. And then, of course, once these projects are, once the incentive period expires, they go fully on the tax rolls. And so for the long term, we've added a lot of property investment. And if you want more information, you can go to our economic development page on our website. And again, the economic development report has a lot more metrics in it, a lot more economic indicator info, if anybody would be interested in that. So I'm going to turn over to Diane now.
So a little bit about the city's role in economic development. We have a number of partners that we fund, and they provide services related to economic development. You can see the funding amounts here. I would note that one of the roles of the Public Incentive Review Committee, your advisory board that looks at economic development issues, they do review these budgetary requests and make a recommendation not only to the city but also to the county. And I would like to point out that the county is a significant partner in funding these agencies. That isn't always the case, in my experience, with many counties in Kansas as far as economic development funding. So the city staff, we work with the chamber and the other economic development organizations on initiatives, responding to requests for proposals for business expansions and relocations. We work with applicants that want to apply for certain city incentives in accordance with established city policies that we have on economic development and various incentive tools. We would assist the City Commission with the economic development policies. As you know, we have a number of economic development policies. Oftentimes, these policies are established in state law, and then there are certain criteria that narrow the application of that particular tool to our community. And so every tool that we have a policy on that sets out the eligibility, the criteria, and that kind of thing. And then from time to time, we might have a special program like a Catalyst program that looks at combining a couple of different incentives together to try and be proactive with incentives. We monitor compliance with economic development incentive agreements, and as Britt showed you, we produce an annual economic development report that she does an outstanding job of laying out all of the status and being very transparent about all of our economic development activities. We also are involved in a number of city departments in the facilitation of business expansions, relocations, new starts in the way of our work with development proposals, business licensing in some aspects, departments that are involved in looking at building permits, utility services, and all of those kind of things that many of our staff members are involved in. We also, with the newly adopted Plan 2040, I would like to remind the Commission that there's a chapter on economic development there. It really does a great job of setting out some key goals and visions for economic development. And I think now, as with a lot of aspects of Plan 2040, we really need to take it to the next level and be very strategic about it to look at certain action steps and things like that related to the goals that are established in that relatively short chapter. But I think as part of that, work with the stakeholders that we're going to be talking with today, our other partners in economic development, and the community to determine what steps should we take to further the goals, and then identify who should be assigned some of those responsibilities, kind of so we're all on the same page with regard to economic development. And now I'll turn it over to Steve Kelly with the Chamber Economic Development Corporation.
Good evening. Steve Kelly from the Lawrence Chamber, EDC. Very pleased to be here this evening to give, just as has already been indicated, a very brief overview. And I did indicate to Diane that I'd be more than happy to come back at some point and spend a lot more time, but we are a little short on time this evening, I'm aware. We have a video here that I'll start off with, and then I have some slides as well. And this is an update that we gave to our EDC investors just last week. Thank you for allowing me to show that. I think it in a pretty short time gives a pretty good overview of a number of the things that we're working on. I do have a number of slides, and these aren't, where the intent was not to go over each slide. This was kind of a deck to give you something to look at as you have the opportunity. I will hit on touching on maybe a few of them as we go through, but this is really more for you to be able to use as you have an opportunity. These are the strategic priorities that were set out several years ago in our Growing Forward campaign. I think all speak pretty well at things that are very important to economic development, but that's kind of the basis for the things that we work and work around. This is just some of the things that I would classify as successes. And then there is more detail on each of these projects, some of which you're very familiar with already. We also have been through a process to identify and develop a set of target industries that we believe are good fits for the community and the area. A lot of these, as you'll see, are more advanced from a science and technology standpoint, because we think that that's a strategic advantage that Lawrence has versus a lot of communities, and those are things that we want to focus on. Doing that with our other partners that have been mentioned here, and also the University of Kansas, which is going to be a critical part of anything in a lot of these areas. One of the other things that we're really working hard on now is to do some things to enhance our entrepreneurial development opportunities here. We're working with Launch Lawrence, and it was hit on one of the slides. The group that's working on the Launch Lawrence concept, we are kind of meshing them with the startup factory that's based in Ames, Iowa. A lot of the concepts are very similar. The folks in Ames are ahead of us considerably, and we have been working closely with them to try and advance our process here a little bit quicker. And then the others you're all familiar with. 1 Million Cups, the SBD support that you fund through our budget, all those kinds of things. Here's another area that I think and I think GR and Adam will talk about this when the BTVC's up here. We're also involved in a collaboration with, again, this set of partners on a plan for West Campus development for a business and research park that kind of flows down the hill from where BTVC is currently located. We've also, I think, done a lot of things working collaboratively with KU on the career side. We've had a couple of career fairs that were Lawrence specific. We're looking at doing some potential tours of some industry clusters to expose students to some of the opportunities in Lawrence, and we think that's an important thing. And then we've also tried to do some things to familiarize people in the business community with some of the assets of the university that are on campus. And a lot of times people aren't aware that there's some incredible things happening at the university and some incredible research going on. These are some of the metrics, and this is just kind of a sampling. And again, some of the different things that we're doing to try and touch on a number of areas of importance to us. A lot of it around, all comes back to jobs and economic development opportunities. And then here I touch on the entrepreneurial ecosystem a little bit. And then, I'll back up. And then one of the things that was mentioned, I think there were a couple of questions about metrics, and we have entered into a relationship with the Mid-America Regional Council for data and data support on some various things. And so some of the questions that were asked, I think we may have the ability, working with Mark, to come up with some of that. And we've also established in that process, and these we're doing on a monthly basis, kind of updates. We are establishing some peer communities. We haven't gone outside kind of the regional area yet. We have Manhattan, Topeka. I think Wichita and maybe one of the Johnson County communities are kind of what we're doing, just so we can see how we're doing in terms of employment, unemployment, wage rate changes, those sorts of things, to give us a baseline to work with. But I think there are opportunities with either the tools that we have or using Mark or the Kansas City Area Development Council to get at a lot of these data-related sorts of things that might be of interest to the commission. So that's it. I'm certainly available for questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Very good. And again, I'd be happy to come back anytime for more in-depth.
Appreciate it.
Commissioners, City Management, thank you for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to come and report what we're doing. The city asked us to keep this portion brief, and I realize we're going long, so we've got just a few slides we can show you that's kind of what we're doing and then where we're going, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So we were put together by the city, the county, KU, and the local business community 10 years ago to leverage their respective assets, but more importantly, try to create, recruit, grow, and retain high-tech and life sciences companies to northeastern Kansas. You know, in year one, I think we had 4 companies in the system, and we're going to end this year with 55. Those 55 companies represent 338 employees, and those employees are paid well over $20 million a year. And those, I want to mention those 3 because that's what we track closely: companies, jobs, and payroll. That's what grows the tax base, that's what creates wealth in the local community, and that's what we care about and what we try to do every day. What's not on here is our average wage is over $60,000 a year as well, which is pretty good for this part of the country. I won't go too deeply into this. This just shows you the trajectory of companies, jobs, and payroll over time. What this doesn't say is when you increase companies and you increase employees, the availability of space goes down conversely. I mean, there's a obvious lack of space when more people move into it. Right now at the BTBC phases 1 and 2 on West Campus, And then the expansion facility in West Lawrence, we're literally at 100% capacity. We don't have anywhere to put new companies. We're going to have to get creative because we certainly don't want to turn companies away that want to move here or start up, and we don't want to stifle any companies that are growing. We're working with the university. They're going to help us temporarily bridge with some flex space between now and the next 12 to 18 months. But the point of this is we need to be thinking about the next phase of our growth, which is this. This is phase 3. Over here on the right, you can see BTBC phase 1. Phase 2 is off the slide, but this is what we're actively working on right now, which is phase 3. And I say phase 3 because it's the third phase of a multi-phase plan to develop a research and business park on KU's West Campus. So you're going to have private industry, researchers, academics, entrepreneurs, government, all densely kind of clustered, creating new innovations that have commercial potential that ultimately create high-paying jobs. And we're working very closely with our partners at the city, the county, the chamber, and the university to figure out what those, not only this next phase looks like, but what do the next 5, 6, 8 phases look like, and who's involved, and how do we do this in the most smart possible way we can to leverage the assets we have here. And lastly, just phase 3 size and scope. It's going to be between 70 and 75,000 square feet, probably between $24 and $27 million. This one will be a little bit different because you'll have fewer companies with bigger footprints. It's going to be more of a kind of a graduate facility. But what's good is some of our existing companies who are growing beyond their existing space can move out of phases 1 or 2 and into phase 3, which will allow that space to kind of help us return to our incubator roots for that building. So you're going to have kind of the startup incubator building, you'll have this kind of graduate facility, and then hopefully we'll grow from there. But so in phase 3, those 8 to 12 companies will represent about 2 to 250 employees and 12 to 15 million in annual payroll. Our goal is to break ground Q2 of next year, and we're working diligently to get that done. Like I said, it was brief. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm going to give you also a brief overview of Peaslee Tech, which is really hard to do in 2 minutes, but I'm going to do the best I can. This is, when I first came to Peaslee, we needed to find one of our niche, and one of them has been in developing apprenticeship programs. And now our little school here in Lawrence is the largest provider of apprenticeship programs in Kansas. And by a long shot. We have 11 programs currently registered with the Apprenticeship Commission of the state, and I think the next closest organization has 3. And we're doing it in a lot of different areas. You know, we do building trades there, you know, we do welding and we do auto tech, but Lawrence Memorial Hospital needed medical assistance. So we started that program. We had our first graduates last month. We started sterile processing also in healthcare, but programs for the hospitals as well for their expansion. In addition, we do programs in so many different areas. It's kind of hard to capture them all for you here, but I'll give you a little idea. We have grown to 26 on-campus programs in the last 2 years. Truck driving, pharmacy technicians. It's in a broad array of areas, and we'll continue to. This development is driven by demand. So the jobs that are high demand in our community are what we focus on developing programs for. We don't train anyone for a job that doesn't pay a livable wage. Okay, so for us, we look at about $16 for a single person an hour in Douglas County as a livable wage. Most of the jobs that we train, they come out at much higher wages than that. We entered into an agreement this year with Cengage, which is the largest producer of textbooks in the world, actually, and developed an online partnership with them. And that has grown just rapidly over the last 6 months since we started that partnership. Again, we're bringing things to people that they maybe couldn't get this way through the online forum. And we expect that will continue to grow over the next several years as more and more people find this as a alternative way to improve themselves in their jobs or to get jobs. This is what we have done. If you can see this very well, we had 155 students enrollments in our first year. We'll have over 1,800 this year. Now, I'm talking about like course enrollments, and where that has come in such big numbers has been direct training in companies here in Douglas County and in Lawrence. We've done some very large projects for ICL, for Smuckers, we're doing a very huge one right now for developing employees at Berry Global. And so that's, in addition to growing in our apprenticeships and our on-campus programs, we're training a lot of people to make them better at their jobs in their companies as well, which I think was kind of what we needed to do in order to develop the relationships with the companies where they come to us now when they need something. I think that it'd be pretty safe to say with all the major manufacturers in our area that if they're looking at a program or looking at training, we're their first source.
Training City of Lawrence employees?
We are, and that's one of our big projects this year. We had our first meeting a few weeks ago of our public employee training consortium that we're building. It's for all the public entities in Douglas County, including KU and Haskell, us as educational institutions, but all the school districts, all the municipalities, and we sent out a little blast today, in fact, to that group about some slots we have in a couple of apprenticeships coming up in January, and the city filled one of them for auto tech, for a mechanic program. And so what we're building with this group of all these entities, I think where there's 22 different entities in it, is kind of a central place where we can all come together and talk about our training needs and do them together rather than separately. This is where we're heading. Mechatronics, you may not be familiar with that term unless you're really nerdy. And so mechatronics is really, it's automation and robotics. There are thousands of robots in our community right now, in the manufacturing businesses in our community. And so we're training people to make the robots work. We have a program, we're the first registered apprenticeship in mechatronics in Kansas. We're also the first people in Kansas to do, first program in Kansas to do what's called voice writing. So we train court reporters with a new technique called voice writing, which involves some really exotic software. And if you haven't been exposed to it, they're actually speaking into a cone when they're in the court. They're not typing anymore. And so it's voice recognition software that they learn how to manipulate. More healthcare and more IT programs. Those are we really have a good handle right now on the building trades. We have programs set up for all the major building trades and some of the other skilled trades like with welding and auto tech we have as well. So we're expanding into these other areas as the demand comes from the community for these things. And that was the last slide. 2 minutes, right?
Any
so
questions?
Thank you very much, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our job was to receive the overview. We'll do public comment. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Is there anything to chat about?
It's good to see an update. That's really nice. Yep. Appreciate that.
Appreciate all the work.
Thank you. Okay, well, we will move on to item number 3. Receive presentation and training from City Attorney's Office on the Kansas Open Meetings Act and Kansas Open Records Act.
Tony knows how to clear a room.
Thanks. I was just thinking, you've certainly had a very interesting agenda tonight.
Yeah,
Very
definitely.
diverse topics.
Mhm.
And I get to finish out the evening with an overview of 2 very important laws. So I recognize that it's been a long day for you, so I'll try to move through them swiftly. The Kansas Open Meeting Act, well, we're going to cover 2 acts tonight, the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act. The Open Meetings Act was enacted by the Kansas legislature in 1972. Many states across the country, after the Watergate scandal, implemented a number of good government and sunshine laws, and Kansas was certainly one of them. It has been described as the cornerstone of public access to local and state government, and it requires local and state governments to conduct business of the public in public. The law applies when the body involved is a covered entity and there is a meeting as defined in the Act. The bodies subject include all legislative and administrative bodies, state agencies, political and taxing subdivisions which expend or are supported by public funds. So that would include the City Commission and our advisory boards. It also applies when there is a meeting. And for a meeting to occur under this law, there has to be all 3 of these elements. There has to be a gathering or assembly in person or through the use of a telephone or other medium for interactive discussions. Has to involve a majority of the membership of the body, and the purpose of the discussion is for the discussion of the business of the body. So I want to look at each one of those in more detail. An interactive communication. That obviously applies when members are in the physical presence of one another. It can apply on telephone calls or video conferencing, conference calls, etc., and it can apply on online communications. The next element of a meeting is involving the majority of the membership of the body. For our 5-member commission, the magic number is 3. So when 3 of you are together, there might be a meeting, so we have to be mindful of that. The third element then is discussing the business of the body, and it is discussion that triggers this law. It's not just the fact that, it's not a requirement that there be binding action for this law to apply. But I want to make a note that social gatherings are not subject to the Open Meetings Act if there's no discussion of the business of the body. So you are free to attend social gatherings, and you are free to attend conferences where items of general interest are discussed, so long as the specific business of the City Commission is not discussed by 3 of you. I want to go into a discussion about electronic communications because they are so common and prevalent in our life today. The Attorney General has indicated that the mere fact that a communication is electronic doesn't raise a coma issue. If the majority of the body uses an electronic communication to engage in interactive discussions, however, that might raise a coma issue. A single email sent to other members would likely not be considered a violation, but if there is an instantaneous discussion among the body, that might be a matter that we'd have to be paying attention to. So be careful in online chat rooms or with instant messaging, because that might trigger the open meetings law. I just want to say a couple words about emails. We do recommend that you avoid initiating an online discussion with your fellow commissioners through email. You often will receive emails from members of the public, even from city staff, where all 5 commissioners are copied on that email where you're getting information or you're getting someone is expressing an opinion. We would encourage you not to hit reply all so that you don't start a discussion among your commissioners. So be careful with that reply all button. I want to talk just a minute about serial meetings. Typically, meetings of a public body occur in person. However, a meeting could also occur by a series of serial meetings. And a serial meeting is described as a series of interactive communications of less than a majority, and it's not permitted under the Open Meetings Act, and there may be a violation if those smaller meetings collectively involve a majority of the membership of the body, so 3 commissioners. It shares a common topic of discussion concerning the business or affairs of the commission, and it's intended by any or all of the participants to reach an agreement on a matter that would require binding action to be taken by the body. So just a quick review. The Open Meetings Act applies when the body involved is a covered entity and there is a meeting. In order for there to be a meeting, there has to be all 3 of these elements present. Now, if the law does apply, what do we have to do? The law requires that meetings of public entities must be open to the public and proper notice must be given. So first, meetings have to be open. They have to be held in places that are accessible to the general public. We couldn't hold a meeting in a place that was so small and confined that members of the public could not observe the meeting. We couldn't have meetings in a place that charged admission for persons to enter it. So they must be open to the general public. And then the meetings have to be conducted so that the public can observe or listen to the proceedings. We would not be permitted to make decisions by secret ballot, et cetera. The whole point is to allow the public to see and observe your proceedings. The next important requirement we have to satisfy is notice. Notice of the date, time, and place of any regular or special meetings must be given to any person who's requested such notice. Now, the law does not set forth any particular amount or time of notice that has to be given. It's sort of taken on a case-by-case basis. So if, for instance, the city suffered a catastrophic tornado or something, and you had to call a meeting to make sure that services were being provided, you could call that meeting with just hours' notice even, as long as it's reasonable for the circumstances. And then in order for a person to be entitled to receive notice, they do have to request it. Just a couple comments on agendas. The law actually doesn't require that an agenda be created, but if a body does create one, it should obviously include the topics that are planned for discussion. Agendas can be amended, and if they exist, they should be made available to those who request them. The law does allow for closed meetings, and these are called executive sessions. Meetings that are closed to the public are permitted in limited circumstances. However, binding action cannot be taken during an executive session. But executive sessions are certainly useful for discussing topics that are permitted by law to be discussed while protecting important privacy interests. The law sets forth 16 topics that can be discussed in executive session. The City Commission has historically used just 4 of those. Well, we've used more than 4, but these are the most common. We sometimes will have a closed session if there is a discussion of personnel matters of non-elected personnel. If there's consultation with the body's attorney, which would be deemed attorney-client privileged. It can also be permitted to discuss employee or employee negotiation matters, and then also for preliminary discussions relating to the acquisition, not the sale, but the acquisition of real property. The law is very specific about how you go about recessing into executive session. First, you have to convene in an open public meeting. There has to be a formal motion, and it has to be seconded, and it has to carry. It has to pass. And the motion has to contain the justification for the closure, the subject to be discussed, and the time and place where the meeting will resume. So you'll note that when we have executive session motions, I do insist that they be read in their entirety. We pay very close attention to make sure we're meeting these requirements. And then the process that we follow, the motion, has to be recorded in our minutes. All right, with that, I'm going to turn to the Kansas Open Records Act, another...
Excuse me, Tony, could I interrupt with a question?
Sure.
Could we consider the topic that was raised earlier about the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods meetings in context of what you've just covered, where the suggestion was that there would be 3 of us attending the land meeting. And, I suggested that we publish notice of that meeting.
Yes.
They're held at the library. They're open to the public.
Yes, you could attend those meetings as long as you did not engage in an interactive discussion among the 3 of you on a topic that might be before this body. So you will often be invited to public meetings, and you are certainly welcome to go there and listen and take in the information. If, however, the sponsors of that meeting, though, want each one of you to stand up and speak and address particular topics that come before this body, you should respectfully decline to do that and reserve those types of discussions to be held, in a public meeting with the commission and in our normal
So the notice
setting.
requirement doesn't provide us the opportunity to interact in those meetings.
Say that again.
If we provide notice of that meeting on our calendar every month, that doesn't provide us with the opportunity to address issues that are raised to us.
Well, we have that calendar maintained so that the public will know where there is an opportunity for 3 of you to be present. But we do want to reserve, if there are 3 of you at a meeting, that it follow our normal procedures. I mean, we would need to give notice to all of the people that have requested it, and I guess by posting it on our agenda, that those agendas are sent to the people that request it. So, if you'll recall, a few years ago when you first joined the commission, there were large meetings at the Lead Center of a conglomeration of churches. And they invited all of the commissioners at that time to come and speak and participate in the discussion there. And they talked about topics related to, I think, affordable housing or other social service needs of the community. And those topics are topics that are often discussed in this very room. And it was our recommendation that you could attend those, but that you should not actively and participate in discussing specific items that come before this commission in that venue. But instead, you'll recall that we had special meetings with topics dedicated to those topics. And that would be a preferred approach. One, they can be recorded as they are here. The rest of your commissioners, the full body can attend. Staff can be available in case there are questions that come up. So,
As I recall those meetings, 2 of us went, 3 did not.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll acknowledge, and Craig and I were talking about this very thing today. These laws do complicate communications. They often slow down. They make us less efficient in interacting with the public. But if you'll recall that the purpose of this is to ensure that the general public has an opportunity to participate and hear your deliberations and how you view and various topics and what your discussion among yourselves, among the commissioners is, and how you decide things. It's really created to try to make that available to the public. And in these smaller meetings where they may not be accessible to the full public, it does complicate those.
So your advice is that if there are 3 of us there, that we respectfully decline to comment on any of the issues that come up?
Yes, if it is a topic that you often talk about here in the commission room.
Yeah.
It's the business of the body.
Okay. Thank you.
Or that only 2 commissioners attend, or fewer.
Yeah.
Would be an option as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay?
Thank you, Tony.
Yes. With that, I'll go on to the Kansas Open Records Act. All right. Again, this is a law that encourages public records to be open for inspection by any person unless the law allows it to be closed. It is to be liberally construed and applied to promote openness. The law does provide a procedure for the public to view and make copies of governmental records, and it applies to the state of Kansas and all political and taxing subdivisions. The public record is defined to be a record that is made, maintained, kept by, or possessed by a public agency or any officer or employee of a public agency pursuant to their duties, regardless of the location of the record, if it relates to the functions, activities, programs, or operations of the public agency. Records can be in any form, including written records, photographs, computer data, and email. A public record under this law, however, does not include records which are owned by a private person or an entity and are not related to functions, activities, programs, or operations funded by public funds. For example, if I had my son's grade card in my office, obviously that is a private record of my son and of my family, and even though it is in the possession of me at City Hall, that would not be a public record. It also does not include records that are maintained or kept by an individual who's a member of a governing body of any taxing or political subdivision of the state. That provision, however, only relates to the personal records of the member of the governing body. If it relates to the business of the agency or the governing body, then those would be public records. A public record also does not include records that don't exist at the time of the request. We don't have a duty to create records that don't already exist. So who can make a request under this open records law? Any person. It could be an adult, a child, a corporation, a nonprofit entity. They do not have to be a resident of the city, of the state, or even of the country. The agency can require that the request be in writing. We can request the requester's name and address, and we can request proof of identification. If the records that they're seeking includes a list of names and addresses of individuals, we can require a written certification that that requester will not use those names and addresses to solicit sales of products or services. We cannot inquire about the reason for the records. We cannot ask why they are requesting the particular records, however. The requester has a number of rights under this law. Unless the record is closed, the public has a right to review all public records. Any person can request copies of records, and if copies can't be made where the record is located, we do have to make arrangements to take them to a place where copying could be made. If portions of the record are closed, we do have to redact that and then make the rest of the record available to the requester. There are, however, some limitations on the requester's rights. The requester may not remove a public record from an agency without the written consent of the record custodian. The public agency, we are not required to make copies of radio or recording tapes or discs, videotapes or films, pictures, slides, or graphics unless it's shown in a public meeting. And we do not have to provide copyrighted materials without the permission of the copyright holder. There are procedures in how we are to respond to a request. It must be acted upon as soon as possible, but not later than the end of the third business day following receipt of the request. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to turn over the records in 3 days. It just requires that we act upon them. There are 3 responses that are available. We either can provide the record in the form that's requested if possible. We can advise the requester that it is under review or we have to gather the records, and we cannot get that turned over within 3 days. For instance, if the records are stored off-site or if it requires us to search through a number of folders, we can let them know that there will be a delay in providing the records. Or we can request or we can deny the request if there is a valid exception that allows the record to be denied. CORA applies only to records that exist at the time that they are requested. We don't have to create records that don't exist. Also, while a person can ask for information, analysis, or an explanation, if it is not already contained in a record, we do not have to create or provide that explanation or provide written answers to questions. We oftentimes do, though, in an effort to be, accessible to the public. The law does allow us to charge fees, but we can only recover our actual costs to provide the requested records, and those actual costs would include staff time to retrieve the record, to review and to redact information from the record, plus any cost for making the copies or providing the copies. We can estimate the fees and collect them before we turn over the records. That is allowed under the law. The law does allow for redaction. If the record contains material that's not subject to disclosure, we do have a duty to redact, but then make the rest of the record available. And we can charge our staff time for doing that redaction. There are some prohibited uses of public records. A number of records, particularly the city has a number of records with names and addresses of individuals in our community. The law prohibits those being used for marketing, except in limited cases. The law also permits a public agency to require a person to certify that they will not use those names and addresses for any prohibited use. There are possible ramifications for violations, and it could be reported to the Attorney General or to our district attorney. And the sanctions for a violation are civil. They are not criminal, but can be up to $500 per violation. So those are two laws that we take very seriously. I appreciate your attention to my presentation tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
I had a question. How about working documents, such as notes by staff and?
Yes, there is an exception that says that notes, preliminary reports, drafts, and draft memoranda are not required to be provided, that they can be held back. The law really wants to make available the final product.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anything else?
Who's our custodian of record?
We have several. The city clerk is the official main custodian, and many of our records requests are directed first to the city clerk. But then under our internal policy, we have designated other records custodians. So each department will have a records custodian designated. Oftentimes it is the department director or someone who has specific responsibilities for working with records.
Other questions?
Nope.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
open it up for public comment. Hearing none, I guess this report is thus received, or this presentation.
We're done.
And we are done.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.